Ha! I am live. Let's go and show myself in different Discords. We'll be back. Someone in my YouTube chat. Hello, Big Zebra. Welcome in. If you notice any trolls, bonk. Oh. Or alert me, and I'll bonk them. Mwah. Hello. I'm just shilling myself. Not bad. I could hear the speedway races earlier on up here in the north of Glasgow. I'm not going to tell you the exact location. You can look it up if you want. But it's just down the road from my actual flat. And when you're this high up and you've got the window open, you can hear them. Or not that well. In saying that, from where I currently sit, it would probably take me 20-25 minutes to walk down to it. Woohoo! Thank you. Much appreciated. Mwah. How are you doing? Got up to 23 today here. It was kind of hot. Luckily enough, not sticky. It wasn't raining that much. It rained during the night, but when the sun rose, it kind of cleared up. It was still a little bit overcast, but it was just hot. It wasn't humid because barely any rain. I hate it when it gets sticky. I sweat bad enough. Ugh. Why does that keep on pausing? That's weird. Look up. There we go. How's this doing actually? It's only 64%. My main phone is still charging. It's only on 64%, so that's probably going to take another half hour. Okay, let's go over to my watch later. Let's see what we can do. Check in on the cursed timeline first, because it's all we deserve. Ooh. Let's start with Demo. Demo's good people. We like Demo. He is also a Green Party member, so well done, Demo. Take it away, my Cornish comrade.
Right, so the hijacking and kidnap of the Freedom Flotilla vessel Madeleine and its crew are just a tip of a big fat fetid iceberg as far as the UK government are concerned, because it has exposed the UK government's complicity in Israeli actions and not holding them to account. To even stretch so far as abandoning a British flag vessel as the Madeleine was and its crew when it was basically British sovereign territory says a lot about what the Starmer regime thinks about sovereignty, doesn't it? But they aren't the only ones they've abandoned. See, it's one thing to see a British ship and its international crew abducted and to just let Israel do it. What about British people in Israel? Seems they aren't protected either, as another grossly underreported story relates to, posing the question as to whether anyone or anything from Britain is safe from Israeli detention, should they be placed in that position. But it's also not just a problem for the Starmer government either, as the Tories before them have only now been exposed for just as big a scandal in the pursuit of protecting Israel at all costs. A story no mainstream media outlets have covered at all, independent media again carrying the weight of real journalism in the UK. And it means not only do the likes of Keir Starmer and David Lammy have big questions to answer, but so now does David Cameron.
سريع جدا لم يعطوا أي تنبيه أصلا بالأساس.
Rejoice! Sozzled Snake has arrived. Hi Sozzled, great to see you, comrade. Hope you're doing well. I've brought my hair down to show you all how long it is. And the split ends are annoying the fuck out of me. Might need to go to the hairdressers on my next benefit payment day, just to get it tidied up. Maybe take off an inch. The shampoo and conditioner set that I'm using is actually doing quite well for me. It looks good and it feels really soft and it's shiny, as you can tell. Back to Demo.
أنهم سيأتون لمحاصرة القرب. كنا في تلك اللحظة نبعد حوالي 100 ميل في المياه الإقليمية الدولية عن غزة. لم نكن بالقرب تماما من أي حدود إسرائيلية.
Have big questions to answer.
But
But so now does David Cameron.
In case they can't see
كان
it.
سريع جدا لم يعطوا أي تنبيه أصلا بالأساس أنهم سيأتون لمحاصرة.
The boat was surrounded very quickly. They don't give any warning at all that they were going to surround.
صارت القرب كنا في تلك اللحظة
At the moment, we're about 100
نبعد
miles
حوالي
away
100 ميل
in
في المياه الإقليمية
international
الدولية عن غزة. لم نكن بالقرب تماما من أي حدود إسرائيلية. انتشرت طائرات درون كثيرة.
Many drones were spread out in the sky. She put a very strong light on the boat.
في السماء سلط ضوء شديد جدا على القارب وبالتالي لا نستطيع الرؤية من حولنا. وبدأت تلقي هذه المادة التي هي علينا ربما تظهر هنا في جانب منها. نعم نلمس هذه المادة بجلدنا حتى تصبح باللون الأسود. حصروا القارب في خلال ثواني معدودة ما بعد رش هذا الشيء على القارب وقفزوا على القارب سريعا. احتجزونا بغرفة داخل القارب لمدة وصلت إلى يوم تقريبا. هذا اليوم كل ما كانوا يفعلوه أنهم يحاولوا أن يعطونا طعام وماء بشرط أن يأخذوا صورة لنا وهم يفعلون هذا. طبعا هذا جعل البقية يرفضون أن يأخذوا أي طعام أو شراب منهم بالمرة. هذا القارب ظل يسير لقرابة 12 ساعة تقريبا 12 ساعة في المياه الإقليمية الدولية إلى أن أوصلونا إلى أجدود تقريبا. بقينا داخل القارب لقرابة 10 ساعات أخرى. ابتدأوا طبعا في البداية بسحب ريما حسن وغريتا تمبر ومعهم تييغو الذي كان ينظم هذه الرحلة. ومن ثم بدأوا ينادون علينا واحدا تلو الآخر. لم يكن يفرق معهم أي شيء إن كنت صحافة أو طبيب. معنا طبيب سيصل الطبيب اليوم بعد ساعتين تقريبا من الآن. حالته سيئة جدا. القنصل الفرنسي هناك ما أن يحاول أن يجلس مع أي شخص يفتح عليه الباب ولا يسمح له بالسرية مع مواطن الدولة. كانوا يزعجوا القنصل بشكل سيء جدا. غريتا على مدار يوم كامل وكنت أنا وهي بالغرفة ما أن تريد أن تنام أو ترتاح قليلا. كلنا كنا في حالة إرهاق وتعب. كلما كانت تحاول أن تنام أو تسند رأسها على الحائط يأتي إلى الغرفة ضابط وبصوت عالي ينادي عليها غريتا لا تنامي، هذا غير مسموح له. ما أن شعر أحد الضباط من أنني بدأت أفهم قليلا ما يفعلوه اقترب مني وقال قال لي لماذا أنت نازل هكذا بهذا الشكل ولماذا رائحتكم سيئة. قلت له أنتم لم تدعونا نرتاح منذ 3 أيام تقريبا. تخبرون بأن نقطع أيدينا في هذه اللحظات. حاولوا أن يرهقونا قدر الإمكان قبل أن نغادر. حجزونا في غرف ضيقة جدا. من لم يوقع على الورقة تم تهديده. على سبيل المثال نائبة ريما حسن ما زالت هناك غرفة تقل الأوراق. استمعت إلى ضابط يهددها بشكل مباشر. سأكتب رأسك بالحي بالجدار إذا لم توقع على سنجري هذه المعاملة بطريقتنا نحن.
Right, so that was a clip there of Omar Fayyad, the Al Jazeera journalist who joined the crew of the Madeleine to document the voyage, talking about what happened after the crew were abducted and brought back against their will to Israel and the treatment they got. Confined aboard the boat for a day, were only offered food and water on condition they could be photographed, so the crew refused it. They were deprived of sleep for the time they were in detention, threatening people who refused to sign the deportation papers, even threatening European Parliament MEP Rima Hassan with having her head hit off the wall if she didn't sign. Still, nothing from the UK government in defence of this crew aboard a British flagged vessel, just so that it...
You heard Damo correctly there. It was a British flag they were sailing under. So that technically that is a British boat. So the government should have done something. They were still in international waters. And I'm essentially calling that a kidnapping. Unlawful detention. Bloody monsters. And our government done fuck all. Alright, you fucking sanctioned those two nutters. Fuck that. You were meant to help that fucking crew. Scum.
Was intolerable. The seizure of the Madeleine by Israeli forces in international waters represents not just a gross violation of international maritime law, but a deeper failure by the UK government to uphold its obligations to its citizens and to international justice. Starmer's frankly intolerable.
Well done, Sausage, yeah. Them and other people on a boat were denied, they were blocked entry, they weren't allowed to dock. So she went back and went into hiding and stuff like that. That's how we got that book, when she got sent back from that boat. And kept having to hide and stuff like that. Yeah. Then she done her diary, which lots of school children read when they're at school. All over here at least. I don't know if that one's still on the curriculum, actually. I think it should be. I read it when I was in first year, when I was 11.
Response is just a euphemism for his cowardice and his complicity. When the UK abandons its own vessels, the citizens aboard them, even the framework of international law, it's not simply feigning people or those it has responsibility for. It is actively participating in a dangerous erosion of legal and moral norms on the global stage. But the Madeleine seizure was not a one-off. It symbolises a pattern of Israeli aggression against humanitarian efforts and, more concerningly, the UK's unwillingness to respond with the forceful diplomatic measures that such acts demand. The UK government has barely raised a protest and certainly has not mobilised legal or diplomatic pressure to secure the release of all of those detained individuals. One of the crew members, Tiago Avila from Brazil, remains imprisoned and is currently on a hunger and water strike and has been since 4 a.m. on Monday. A desperate plea for international attention which the UK continues to ignore. However, the case of the Madeleine is also just the latest example of UK government indifference towards those it bears responsibility for. How about the case of a lady who goes by the title of Ms. D. Murphy? Have you heard of her? Heard of her story yet? Probably not. It was a comment on one of my videos yesterday that made me aware of this one because I hadn't seen it. You see, Miss D. Murphy is a 70-year-old British activist who was arrested in the West Bank about a week ago now. Another case that further demonstrates the UK government's abdication of its duty to protect its citizens abroad, not just on boats, but seemingly in any capacity whatsoever where it comes to Israel. Arrested under what the International Solidarity Movement, the ISM, has described as a false charge, being in a military zone, Murphy's case has received scant attention from the UK government. She has vowed to contest her arrest and the attempts to deport her. But unlike the diplomatic...
Wow, I didn't know the West Bank was a military zone. Fucking ghouls. No problem, Sozzled. Self-care is always good. Thank you for dropping by. Always a pleasure. Night-night. Stay beast. She was probably there protesting against the illegal settlements that they shouldn't have erected. British, I didn't hear about this one. This is the first time I've watched this video by Demo. Holy fuck. My government sucks.
Support often extended to British citizens in legal jeopardy abroad, Starmer's government appears silent when it comes to Israel. Murphy and the Madeleine and the crew of the Madeleine are only two examples, though, but they point to a broader reality that British citizens are not safe from Israeli aggression should they be placed on the receiving end of it, and their government will not defend them. Still, there are attempts at appeasement, though, aren't there? To great fanfare, the UK has sanctioned Israeli ministers Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich over their genocidal and incendiary remarks about Gaza. They are two of the absolute worst in Netanyahu's government, but you do still have to appreciate Netanyahu chose to go into power with them too. While this step is certainly a welcome one in and of itself, it is performative at best. The sanctions are symbolic. Neither minister is likely to come to the UK anyway, and it does nothing at all to alleviate the suffering of Palestinians or hold Israel accountable for inflicting that suffering in any meaningful way at all. Starmer's government, like the Tory regime before it, continues to adopt a dual posture of soft rhetorical criticism paired with unwavering material support for Israel. The continuities in UK foreign policy are stark and they are damning. But most egregiously and completely ignored by the main media incidentally is the massive scandal that's just emerged. The former Foreign Secretary David Cameron threatened the International Criminal Court Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan with withdrawing the UK from the Rome Statute, defunding the ICC and isolating it diplomatically if arrest warrants were issued for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defence Minister Yoav Gallant. Cameron not only threatened action but accused Khan of moral equivalence for prosecuting both Hamas and Israeli figures alike. This led to an intervention where the then Sunak government filed a complaint to the court which delayed the ICC's proceedings, didn't it? We remember that, don't we? It effectively shielded Netanyahu and Gallant for a little bit longer from those imminent arrest warrants. Cameron, whilst boasting that no one has been tougher on Israel than me, at the same time that he was doing all this, acted to protect war criminals from international prosecution. So the implications of this are staggering. The UK was preparing to tear up its commitments to international justice by walking away from the Rome Statute, not for its own interests or in defence of universal human rights, but to protect two foreign officials accused of war crimes. Despite the gravity of Cameron's actions, mainstream UK media have totally ignored this story. Middle East Eye have broken it. Publications like The Independent, while covering Greta Thunberg's deportation, have continued to downplay the illegality and severity of the Madeleine seizure, with headlines containing words like kidnapped and war crime in inverted commas as if these are not statements of truth. She was kidnapped. The boat was in international waters, and Israel is committing war crimes that we bear witness to daily. Headlines focus more on celebrity intrigue than on state-sanctioned abduction and the implications for international law of what we're getting, instead passing it off for news. So this silence from the press is not coincidental. It mirrors the political establishment's broader reluctance to hold Israel accountable. As a result, stories like Omar Fayyad's testimony of mistreatment by the IDF or the hunger strike of Tiago Avila remain hidden in independent or foreign outlets like Squawk or The Cradle or Press TV. The Hind Rajab Foundation, the HRF, has already submitted a legal filing to the Metropolitan Police over the seizure of the Madeleine because it was illegal, underscoring that illegality under UK and international law. Yet the government response remains utterly passive. Instead of asserting its sovereignty or defending its maritime interests, the UK government has issued vague statements of disapproval instead. Intolerable is a word fit for diplomatic discomfort, not for the unlawful abduction of British citizens. Had David Cameron succeeded in withdrawing the UK from the Rome Statute, it would have shattered British credibility as a proponent of international law. This would have made the UK a pariah in global legal circles, emboldened authoritarian regimes, and signalled that powerful allies of Israel can act with impunity. The UK would have turned its back on global efforts to prosecute crimes against humanity, all for the sake of protecting two individuals credibly accused of orchestrating a genocide. It's sick. The Starmer government has done little, however, to distinguish itself from those conservative predecessors when it comes to Israel. Beyond Cameron's now revealed threats to the ICC, UK policy has consistently prioritised strategic relations with Israel over the rule of law and human rights. Starmer's Labour has largely adopted a pro-Israel posture, mirroring the Tory approach in rhetoric and action. This continuity is alarming, especially when framed against the backdrop of Gaza's humanitarian catastrophe. The assault on international aid efforts like the Freedom Flotilla and the silencing of British voices demanding accountability. While the UK readily sanctions Russia over Ukraine, it refuses to treat Israel with the same scrutiny, despite mounting evidence of war crimes and systematic oppression. Greta Thunberg's participation in the Madeleine mission has helped bring some international attention to the issue. Her description of being kidnapped by Israeli forces in international waters is not hyperbole, it's a factual representation of the incident. Yet her statements have been largely minimised in British media, reframed through the lens of youthful idealism, an insult to her experience as an activist, frankly, rather than serious allegations of state misconduct. Her condemnation of the war crimes in Gaza following her deportation is barely registered in major UK newspapers. Instead of amplifying her call for justice, Mainstream media coverage is focused on tone, not substance, and treated her opinions as little more than curiosity. The UK government's failures, from Starmer's silence to Cameron's threats, represent a grave danger to international law and to the safety of British citizens abroad. If British-flagged vessels can be seized in international waters without meaningful government response, then UK maritime sovereignty is a myth. If British citizens can be arrested and mistreated abroad with impunity, their passports clearly mean little, and we as citizens to this government even less than that. And if international law is undermined to protect geopolitical allies, then justice becomes selective, hollow, and morally bankrupt. So we need to demand some answers here. Why is our government still shielding foreign war criminals? Why is the media not reporting on the UK's threats to international institutions? And more importantly, why are British citizens and vessels seemingly expendable when it comes to appeasing Israel? The seizure of the Madeleine and the arrest of Ms. D. Murphy are not isolated incidents. They are the visible consequences of a broader UK policy that has, under successive governments, chosen to support Israel even at the expense of British interests and international law. David Cameron's threat to the ICC underscores the lengths to which the UK establishment will go to obstruct justice. Starmer's inaction shows that the same political culture remains fully intact, though. For the UK to reclaim its moral and legal credibility, it's got to do a lot more than issue tepid condemnations. It needs to defend its citizens, uphold maritime law, support international justice, and break free from this toxic legacy of complicity. Anything less is not just a failure, it is an absolute betrayal of everything this country is supposed to stand for. But not everything, it must be said, is going Israel's way where it comes to the Freedom Flotilla, though. In fact, whilst they might have thought they got away with breaking international law, even if the British government won't do anything about that seemingly, others clearly will, and are. So get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch by way of a pick-me-up. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people, and I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.
By threatening the International Criminal Court, David Cameron has joined Vladimir Putin among a small group of unsavory world leaders who have menaced or bullied the ICC. In plain English, the British Foreign Secretary and former Prime Minister has been caught red-handed in an attempt to By threatening the International Criminal Court, David Cameron has joined Vladimir Putin among a small group of unsavory world leaders who have menaced or bullied the ICC. In plain English, the British Foreign Secretary and former Prime Minister has been caught red-handed in an attempt to pervert the course of justice. The motive for David Cameron's outrageous conduct: an apparent desire to protect Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant from war crimes charges. In the words of the ICC, these war crimes embraced, I quote, starvation as a method of warfare and the crimes against humanity of murder, persecution and other inhumane acts. As Middle East Eye revealed on Monday, David Cameron, when Foreign Secretary, told the ICC Chief Prosecutor that Britain would defund the ICC and withdraw from the Rome Statute if the ICC issued arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Gallant. This contempt for the rule of law and readiness to resort to menaces and intimidation would come as no surprise from Donald Trump or Vladimir Putin, but Britain is a country which prides herself on respect for the rule of law. We claim to be part of a moral international order. The fact that Cameron should have resorted to menaces in order to protect the reputation of suspected war criminals places Britain as a part of a group of gangster nations and rogue states for whom might is right. To put the point simply, David Cameron has disgraced himself. He has also disgraced his Conservative Party, and above all, he has brought disgrace on Britain. There are no excuses. He cannot claim inexperience. Cameron was British Prime Minister for 6 years and had been brought back as Foreign Secretary when he sought to intimidate Karim Khan, the Chief Prosecutor. So far, there has been no response from Downing Street to the Middle East Eye revelations about Cameron's despicable behaviour. That silence is deafening. To avoid Britain's reputation being permanently besmirched, Prime Minister Starmer has a duty to come out and make a statement that he is horrified and disgusted by David Cameron's conduct while Foreign Secretary. He also needs to restate Britain's commitment to the International Criminal Court and the values it embodies. This intervention is urgent because pressurising the ICC is a criminal act in international as well as British domestic law. The Rome Statute, which set up the International Criminal Court, doesn't just prosecute those who commit war crimes. It also criminalises those who seek to prevent war crimes being prosecuted. Leaving aside the possible long-term criminal consequences of Cameron's reckless behaviour, the immediate political reverberations are immense. Britain is a country which prides herself on the rule of law. We claim to be part of the rules-based international order. To his enormous credit, Karim Khan, the ICC chief prosecutor, stood up to David Cameron's threats. But the fact remains that a British Foreign Secretary tried to subvert the course of international justice. Cameron needs to break his silence and to explain himself. Meanwhile, Sir Keir Starmer would be well advised to order an inquiry into the shocking revelation that David Cameron, British Foreign Secretary, sought to intimidate the Chief Prosecutor of the ICC.
You are about to hear the horrifying truth, live from Gaza, about how an entire people are being deliberately starved by Israel, facilitated by the West, in front of our very eyes.
Okay, this is someone Owen Jones is going to be Owen Jones is going to be speaking to someone, and this is going to be quite good.
Today I'm speaking to one of the most important and eloquent Western voices during this hideous age of Israel's genocide of the Palestinian people. He's James Elder. Many of you will have seen him and heard from him. He's the spokesperson for UNICEF, of course, the world's leading children's charity. He's been in Gaza repeatedly since this genocide began. He's there now, and he has truly compelling, horrible stories that we need to hear about what Palestinians in Gaza are going through. First thing I want to ask you, James, is, Israel imposed a total siege on Gaza. That's just unambiguously true. They declared that on the 2nd of March this year, and that was already in the context, obviously, of there was a blockade on Gaza before the 7th of October, and since then, obviously, repeated blocking of aid, destruction of local food production, and so on. What was the impact? What's been the impact of the what was imposed on the 2nd of March?
Yeah, those three blockades now, one across the entire strip, two others, 75 to 90 days. The impact is you've got a population on the edge of famine. You've got hundreds of thousands of people, the very real risk of starvation. Now, it's been done in a way that these blockades, remembering it's clearly a war crime to use food as a weapon of war. That will be determined. But each time there's a blockade, when the population becomes so stricken with hunger, then international pressure mounts on, and there's a slight loosening of it, and then as soon as international attention dissipates again, it's tightened. Now, the thing with a famine is that once you have a famine, you have mass deaths. It's way too late. That's always been the case. The difference with starvation is that starvation is the slow collapse of a child's body or an adult's body. The body literally starts to eat itself. You get cognitive decline. Now, starvation's happening here. Children's bodies in Gaza are not waiting for some declaration. So there's this very nasty test being done around how far you can push a population and loosen it for a moment and then go again. The entire conversation here, everyone, is about food. It's all about food. Everyone I speak to, irrespective of their economic circumstance.
One of the justifications for this siege, and I'll come on to the new so-called system that Israel has introduced, but is that Hamas is stealing the aid. And that has been contradicted by, amongst others, Cindy McCain, who's the director of the World Food Programme, and also, I should say, the widow of the late Republican, hawkishly pro-Israel, John McCain. She said that wasn't true. But as someone, you know this inside out, is that claim, which was used to justify the siege, true?
No, in the most clearest sense, the answer from UNICEF is show us the evidence. At no point have we been presented with any evidence of aid diversion to any meaningful level, none whatsoever. Remembering that this is not the first time we've worked in a place that's lacking governance, that is a war zone. This is what the United Nations does, from Somalia to Sudan, since World War II. You know, scores and scores of crises like this. So it just doesn't bear out in evidence. It's as simple as that. So we're at this situation where these statements are made to try and discredit tried and tested aid systems, so as to replace them, so as to supplant them. Now, remembering aid workers, you're talking about doctors, nurses, logisticians. You're not just talking about, armed soldiers handing out food. So there is no evidence. And I think the other important thing to note, Owen, is that aid is so much more than just food. Aid is incubators, it's ventilators, it's vaccines, it's water purification tablets, it's hygiene kits for girls. So firstly, aid is not just food in a box, and secondly, what on earth, what possible reason would Hamas?
James is correct. It's not just food and water. There's lots of other stuff, medicines, vital feminine care products. I don't think I need to describe what those are to use. Vaccines, antibiotics, anaesthesia, lots of different things. Water purification tablets. I've had them once or twice in my life. They taste absolutely vile. You put it's a tablet about that size. It's quite big. But what else you can do? There's little shots of diluting, or you can put in a Berocca as well with it to make it taste a little bit better. But the actual tablet itself is to make sure everything that's in the water gets killed or denatured. Essentially, denatured is probably more accurate. So you can drink the water and get the hydration you need. War crime denying water, by the way. War crime. Well, all of this is war crime. That's a British accent he's got. I wonder where he's from.
For these, so it doesn't bear out in evidence, and in the most clearest sense, either in formal channels or informal channels, we've never had evidence presented to us.
I mean, Israel has set up something called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, a shadowy organisation. We don't know who's funding it. The US Marine who headed it resigned, saying it would not fulfil the principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence. And it only set up aid points in the south, forcing people in the north to flee to the south if they want to eat. Very little food, a lot of it unusable. And Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, said its purpose was the entry of the minimum necessary so that the world does not stop us and accuse us of war crimes. What do you make? And then, of course, the key part is repeated massacres of starving Palestinians by the Israeli military as they try and get the very little food that is then being given out. What do you make of this foundation and this project?
It's incredibly dangerous, and this is not 2020 hindsight. We said it a month ago before it started, in terms of how utterly out of sync it is with what are humanitarian principles. So let's go back a step to look at what humanitarianism actually is, because we saw it. We don't have to look at the scores of conflict zones that the United Nations and brave partners have been doing since World War II. We only have to go back 2 months for the ceasefire. Hostages went home. The Gaza Strip was flooded with food, with water, with medicines. Malnutrition dropped, disease dropped, access to painkillers increased. This was because the United Nations and Partner Zone, we had 400 distribution sites across the Gaza Strip. It's what humanitarian aid is. You go to where people need it. Now, what they've set up, 2, 3, 4 sites just in the south. So if you're elderly, if you're a single mum with kids, if you're wounded, there's thousands of those. If you're an amputee, if you're disabled, forget it. You don't get aid. More than that, so it's 2 or 3 sites. It's militarized, as you rightly say. On the days it has been open, it's often closed. When it's closed, there's contradictory information. People are told to go there, then they're told it's a combat site. In a war zone, contradictory information kills people. It's militarized, so it's not aid workers. You see the images. It is armed men throwing boxes of food on the ground. And we've seen the worst case scenario, not only the deprivation of aid for so many other people who need it, as this effort is to try and remove an aid system that's tried and tested around the world. You see children have been killed just trying to get aid. I was at a hospital 3 or 4 days ago, and there's a little boy, a 13-year-old boy, and he got given money from his dad to go and buy bread. The family's one meal. That's your responsibility. Off the kid goes. He suddenly sees all these people moving to one of these distribution points, and he thinks, I can be a hero in my family, not just bread. I'm going to help bring my family whatever's in one of these boxes. He goes there, and it's the standard story. There is chaos. There is shooting. There is a tank shell. He gets shrapnel all through his body. When I saw him, and I've seen way, way too many children with the wounds of war here. What's striking me this time on my 5th trip back is I'm not just seeing these little girls and boys, I'm hearing them. The screams, the blood-curdling screams. Little boy's still got open wounds. He's got shrapnel in his pancreas. He's got shrapnel they can't remove. He gets 5 mils of painkiller in the morning at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. You know, his dad's in tears as he recounts the story. That's a little boy. You and I are speaking now. I'm getting the same thing from ICRC that another child was killed yesterday. So it's dangerous. It's deepening hunger. And these are sites where people go to get a bag of flour and they come home in body bags.
I should say the Tory MP Kit Malthouse said that they'd replaced the existing humanitarian structures with a a shooting range and an abattoir, and that's coming from a Conservative member of Parliament in this country.
Bloody hell, Kit Malthouse. By the way, I hate the Tory party. They're absolute monsters. I hate them. I hope the party dies. Essentially, it's on its way out anyway. The way the polls are looking, a lot of people who used to vote Conservative, mostly boomers by the way, are either going over reform or they're coming to Labour. So with any luck in the next general election in 2029, the Tories will get absolutely brutalised. They deserve it. We'll see what happens at Holyrood next May. That'll be fun. I will be covering that, don't you worry.
I mean, as well as one of the things which, I mean, there's lots of aspects which aren't properly discussed, but, you know, I mean, one is that the aid being provided, for example, includes dried pasta and flour, but things like basic cooking materials are being banned from coming in. People can't make often the food they have, can they? You can't. What are you going to do with flour if you don't have energy or fuel or to cook it, or water, fresh water, for example?
Absolutely spot on. People spend their day trying to cook. So there's no ready to eat food. Again, that's what humanitarian is. You give people the things that they can use in the circumstances where they are. So yeah, there's no ready to eat food. Nutritionists will always tell me what food poverty is for a child, right? There's 7 types of food. You should get 7 different types. If you get less than it's food poverty, and that then starts to have a long-term impact on a child's nutrition, on their cognitive development and so on. This thing, far from helping nutrition, delivers food poverty in a box, according to nutritionists. On top of that, I'm told by many, many people, because I spend my time here trying to bring evidence to see what's happening. It does frustrate me, Owen, at times. I'm constantly told, you know, there's no international journalists on the ground. I'm well aware of that. There should be. There are reasons there are not. There are reasons why they're banned, so they can't bear witness to this. There are a lot of brave Palestinian journalists on the ground, and I'm not quite sure when the United Nations stopped being an impartial observer. Anyway, I reach out to as many people as I can, like that little boy, Abdurrahman, who is now in hospital, if he's still alive. And I'm told a couple of things. One is that the sugar and the cooking oil, which are the two most valuable things on the black market, are frequently stolen from the boxes before they're distributed. And the other thing is it's a bit of a strongest person wins. I was with a family yesterday that I've known for a long time, since November. We're talking here, and sorry to digress, but it's important. This family is just extraordinary. Fifth-year medical student. Sister is fourth-year English Lit. There's a mechanical engineer. They are, as my Palestinian friend said, a family of geniuses. And the English literature student said, it's just humiliating. Every day is humiliating, James. This is in English. Her English is better than mine. Her eloquence is immense. But within that eloquence means that they also see through all this. The depression and the sadness of what's happening to them, seeps through. So she said it's just utterly humiliating to go every day to a hospice and hope that you'll get a ladle of food. They, as a family, always make a decision. Do they stay again? Do they move? They'd moved 4 times. I met Marwa, the medical student, in November 2023. They'd been displaced 3 times. They went back to their home of rubble. She said she wished she didn't if she knew what it looked like. It's what psychologists have warned me. When people go home and see what they've lost, the level of depression gets worse.
Bloody hell. Medical student, English literature student, a mechanical engineer. Will they be able to start up their studies again? Well, there's I don't think there's any universities left, is there? Well, obviously there's Israeli ones, but they're not allowed to go to those.
When they were evacuated again, they had a discussion, do we leave? When I met them now, they're back in a tent. The mother is terribly depressed because she does have children who are geniuses, and she's utterly aware of what they are lacking and what they are losing. And they had a discussion, would one of the sons in their 20s, the mechanical engineer, go to this site and try and get food? They all agreed that no, they're better to starve where they are than to go and be shot and to be starving. Apparently the scenario is, and I've heard this multiple times now, that many of those people, not all, many of those people getting aid have knives. So if you've got a knife, you get a box. If you don't, like 99.99% of people in Gaza, you get nothing, or you get, as I've seen many times, you get shrapnel or a bullet. This is the system that is somehow being designed to replace the one thing that's proven since World War II to be able to keep people alive in hell zones like this.
I mean, combined as well, what again is neglected is it's not just the lack of food aid getting in, but Gaza's domestic food production has been destroyed. Over 95% of agricultural land rendered unusable, 81% of cropland damaged, 83% of plant life destroyed, almost all cattle and poultry dead, milk production nearly halted. I mean, that's the point, isn't it? It's the need is much, much greater and the provision is much, much smaller.
Absolutely. And those things, you've got to sort of meditate on them for a moment, like the systematic destruction of agriculture, of the economy, of universities, of an education system, the pride of this region, the literacy rates in Gaza, my goodness. And yes, just that lack of access to proper food. And I think people can be tempted, even the outpouring of support and solidarity from people around the world, I think they can be tempted to think, okay, well, there's a bit of rice and so on. Gazans, the family I mentioned before, they're not a rich family at all. They are a working class family here. Spent 30 years building their home though, because that's what you do. That got destroyed in a flash. But Gazans eat chicken, they eat meat. That's what they do. They just had Eid al-Adha. They celebrate. None of that. That's all gone. And as I say, this lack of dignity that people feel. So it's important as we try so hard, we've got to humanize this scenario. I never thought I've spent, Owen, pretty much my working life doing this. And for UNICEF, when you advocate for children, it's not that complicated. You advocate publicly and privately that children, that they get the nutrition that they need, that they're safe, that children are in classrooms. When I've stood in hospitals and seen little girls and boys ripped apart, and children who had an amputation and now they're going to lose their other leg because they're not allowed to be medically evacuated. I suddenly dawned on me once, wow, my challenge here is not to start that level of advocacy. My challenge here is to advocate that children are in fact children here. And that is a terrifying place to start from.
I mean, just
Well
on that,
said,
I mean, my twin
James.
sister
Well
just given
said.
birth, obviously a very special moment, and it just could not stop thinking, there's this constant fretting over a newborn child, making sure it's in a comfortable environment. A lot of new mothers are often obviously very anxious in a very healthy, protective way, making sure they're fed at the right time, all that kind of thing. And I just think, what is under discussed, we've got 20 months of this. And you think about the impact on a child's development in terms of not being fed properly, the constant mental trauma, not being educated, not having healthcare. And you kind of think, how does a child ever recover from that?
Yes, and that's what we think of too, because we are in uncharted territory. There's no headline in saying that every single child in Gaza needs mental health support. That's never been said before of a population. Every single one, there is no doubt. As you say, that decimation of things that mothers need. Before October 7, there were 550 health service points across Gaza, 550. There is now not one that's fully functional. If you're a mother with a sick baby, or you're a mother who's unwell herself and is 7.5 months pregnant and premature, well, the incubators you need are blocked. They're restricted. They're on the other side of the border, 5 miles away. And if your baby gets sick, you can't go to a hospital. The hospital floors are full of children with the wounds of war. And then, so this is the devastation of a society. I mean, it's why I'm so reluctant when we call this a war, because firstly, wars have laws. Secondly, this is like devastation for society, as you rightly point out, the education, the agriculture, the economy. It's a devastation of children, child by child. Education here is the envy of a region. You can talk to any universities around the region and they always talk about how they want Gazans. They're all multilingual, they're all great at sciences. And I've seen that, I've noticed that no matter how many crises occurred in the last 20 years, mums, dads, grandparents consistently found ways to keep their kids in school. It was extraordinary, the value they place on it. But yeah, that's being literally bombed away. And still I talk to young people who are like, can you bring me in a tiny solar, little solar panel so I can charge things because I'm studying at night. People are studying at night. Medical students are studying. 16-year-olds are studying for their exams at night in the bombardment after spending 4 hours looking for firewood and trying to bring a few bowls of soup. It's extraordinary. And the answer is no, I'm restricted from bringing in those things. I mean, that's not my answer, of course, but formally, that's the restriction. So, yes, for UNICEF, knowing what we know around the world when it comes to deprivation, this is all man-made deprivation, what that means to a child, what that means in terms of stunting, the scientific impact of stunting on a child's brain, the lifelong impact it has on the child and therefore on the family, therefore on the community and therefore on the society. It's just
Children need the nutrition so they grow up properly. They get the nourishment that they need to develop cognitively, to obviously get energy and stuff, get the nutrients they need to grow, strengthen their bodies, stuff like that. So this is ghoulish behaviour. This is absolutely fucking disgusting what is happening.
Just another reason why anyone with influence has to act. And my executive director got it right in October 2023. The destruction of Gaza and the killing of so many children cannot possibly bring peace to the Middle East. So whether leaders choose pragmatism or principle, they need to choose one of them, and they both lead to the same place, which finally is to protect civilians, girls, boys, mums, dads in Gaza.
One thing, I mean, these are all grim things to ask about, but the Economist, which actually backed Israel's onslaught, they did a study and they suggested that the death toll from violent means alone, from people killed through traumatic injuries, being bombed, shot, that kind of thing, could be up to 110,000. We know, I mean, for example, in Yemen, the UN's own estimates were that most people who died of indirect causes. They didn't die because of the violence. That I went to a Yemeni refugee camp with UNICEF.
Starvation, dehydration, preventable bacterial infection. What else is indirect? Like food, nutrition, like food, water, proper medical care. So not getting blown up or shot or anything like that. Still war crime, that one, but still war crimes, by the way. Still war crimes. So that be classed as indirect. It's the lack of nutrition and improper medical care, or not hardly any medical care, essentially. The doctors out there are basically running on vapours now, trying to help everyone. Ghoulish. Absolutely fucking ghoulish.
In fact, and I'm not in any way belittling the horror of Yemen, but Yemen was not reduced to the level of apocalyptic ruin and total siege that Gaza has. I mean, from what you know, it's a horrible term often used called excess deaths, indirect deaths, which are not recorded because they're not violent deaths. Is that something, including amongst children? Do you think this is something which is not properly being taken into account when we think about the lethal impact of this?
Without a doubt. I meet children all the time to try to tell their stories. They seem not to resonate with people, but there's kids here with cancer. You talk of your sister. Congratulations, by the way. It's a beautiful moment. It's a beautiful moment for mums here, and being pregnant's a beautiful moment. Not now. It's horrific for people. It's terrifying for them as they see what's happening to their children. So there are kids with cancer. But there's treatment for cancer. There was a very, very world-class cancer part of Shifa Hospital, by the way. That was destroyed. Diabetes, the most simple things. There's no doubt. Yeah, absolutely. Children are being killed. Children are dying. Children are suffering, and suffering greatly too. That's the thing as well. Some of these ailments, without the right drugs, not only to treat them, but just to prevent that pain, make life horrendous for children. And it all speaks then to that idea of medical evacuation.
Like, take me, for instance. I get all my medicines. They're in here, that I take daily. So people, girls, boys, mums, dads, grannies, granddads, who have autoimmune diseases, or like rheumatoid arthritis or osteoarthritis that I've got, they can be treated. They can be medicated. They can get medicine to help with that. But no, blocked, not allowed in. Or stolen and given subpar medical supplies. Fucking hell.
These children who have existing conditions, as you and I are speaking about, all those children that we see who somehow survived the bomb blast, the fire in their house, the airstrike, somehow they survived it, the ones I see. And then they're in hospital, and it's like watching kids be torn apart. The number of children who I've kept in touch with and had an arm amputated, and then because they were denied medical evacuation, 3 weeks later had their hand amputated, and 2 weeks later I'm warned, if they don't get out, James, they'll lose their leg, and they do. So that medical evacuation there's no logistical reason for that. It can happen. It's a simple reason of being denied an exit, and not enough third-party countries, not enough countries in Europe saying, yes, we will take these children. And so these children who survive horrific bombardments, or who are fighting cancer or have got diabetes and need that care that a host of European countries offer, are denied the chance to leave here and the chance to go there. And I'm sorry, it's so graphic. And so they die, but they don't die gently. It's rather horrendous how some of these girls and boys. I saw we're seeing things now, Owen, repeated. I met a little girl yesterday, Dana. Dana's 6. I met her in Al-Aqsa Hospital, and I really noticed because she had these beautiful pink fingernails. All her aunts and uncles were there. And so they explained to me, but she was silent. but they explained that her home was targeted in November 2023, killed both her parents, the story you and so many others have heard for a long time, killed both her parents, and she didn't speak for 6 months. But she's got these amazing aunts and uncles. So after 6 months, they brought that back, and, she was bringing a little bit of Dana back out of herself. And then 2 weeks ago, the home she was staying in was targeted and killed, and 10 family members were killed. Children have endured things that none of us can possibly imagine, and we hope like hell we'll never know anyone that it happens to. Now it's happening again because this 600-day horror show doesn't stop.
Well, just finally, based on what you've seen in terms of what the children of Gaza, because obviously UNICEF exists there to protect and defend the rights for children to be able to live decent, comfortable lives in safety. What do Western states need to be doing? What is the urge? What needs materially to happen to stop the children of Gaza?
BDS on Israel. Boycott. Divest. Sanction. That's what Western governments, supposedly the countries that follow the rules-based international law. BDS. Simple. Lammy, you're a C-word. Frying pan to face for you in Minecraft.
Suffering what is, as you say, an unprecedented catastrophe, which is entirely human-made.
Yeah, and it's not complicated. It's a ceasefire. It's a ceasefire. We've done it before. A ceasefire. Hostages go home. Let's end that horror. Aid floods the Gaza Strip. Mums can promise their kids, promise them, you will wake up tomorrow morning. Children look in their parents' eyes here. They're well aware their parents have lost that ability to protect them. And their parents are well aware they've lost the ability to protect their children. And ask any parent, even me with grown-up kids, that sends a shiver down my spine. So it's a ceasefire. And if they can't come to terms of a ceasefire, then let's stop breaking every international law known and let aid, medicines, water, food, nutrition, hygiene kits, let that come across the Gaza Strip. At the very least, let humanitarian aid come, not men with guns, private contractors guarded by Israeli soldiers. The organisations that have been doing this since World War II and did it during the ceasefire, at the very least, don't let these children starve.
I mean, it's chilling. That is, the bar really is on the floor, isn't it? James, your work as ever in terms of communicating one of the great crimes of our age has something which I think we're all beyond appreciative of. You've been into Gaza now repeatedly. I can't imagine the emotional labour involved in terms of witnessing these horrors being inflicted on children and not being able to stop it. But you communicate this so brilliantly and so well, and it does spur people into action.
I'll just pause it there before my next thing on the watch list comes up. I'll be back momentarily, comrades.
So, beyond appreciative. So everyone do share the video, press like, subscribe, leave your comments. That all helps people then listen to James, which is the point. James, as ever, thank you so much.
Good on you, Owen. Great to speak.
Okay, so many of you texted in various forms of this next question.
Can I guess?
Absolutely.
This is about Elon and Trump?
Yeah, they asked, Trump and Elon are breaking up, who dumped who?
This, by the way, has been so fun.
I rejoined Twitter just for this today. This is worth getting back on.
Someone posted, they're like, oh, so now the left suddenly doesn't think Elon's a Nazi? We're like, no, we know he's a Nazi. We just know he also doesn't like Donald Trump. And that's fun. We're like, you see this bullshit this Nazi said? Like, that's fun to do. Like, the idea that Donald Trump is too evil for a Nazi, that's incredible. Yeah, Elon just goose-stepped his way out of that relationship. And, I saw it unfolding, and I was like, oh my God, Trump just said that Elon shouldn't get any government contracts. Yeah. Yeah. And then Elon said Trump was a pedophile. And I was like, I agree. I was like, suddenly I agree with you both. You both nailed it. It's true.
I thought he was just on a special contract that ended at a certain time. I don't know if he got fired. Yeah, okay.
He was.
Like, because I was like, I know Trump's a stickler for the rules. Like, you can't just extend your contract. You know?
Yeah. He was on a special government contract. Those can only last 130 days.
Right.
And so when he actually, Elon had said he was done on the 128th day. And so I posted something about how, like, oh, it's nice to see Elon realizing that Republicans are hypocritical liars in real time. And a lot of people got mad at me, and they're like, excuse me, but a special appointment ends 130 days in. And I was like, yeah, but they said time and time again he was going to stay past what was legal. And then he didn't. And now I feel a little vindicated. Because just a few days later, suddenly Elon Musk is just like, release the Epstein files.
I hope this burns forever, like a Tesla battery, you know? I just hope it
Yeah, they really blew the doors off of this thing.
I don't know, I just wonder who Pete Davidson's gonna date next. My dad's last parody song was making fun of Elon. It's a song, Three Dog Night, Eli's coming, and they just made it, Elon's coming. And so I was like, when I posted it, I got a bunch of like hate messages, and they're like, oh, you love government waste? And it's like, no, I just don't trust that guy to do it, you know? Like, just because I don't want Drake around my kids doesn't mean I don't believe in babysitters, you know? I just that guy.
We're far enough west in Canada, you can make fun of Drake.
Okay, good. I was like, oh, this is safe space.
Once we get to Ontario, you gotta relax.
I will say on the who dumped who, my brain immediately went to who's the top and who's the bottom.
I don't know if either of their dicks work, to be honest.
I'm pretty sure that they both pay to have someone else watch them get cucked. I think my favorite take on the whole thing has been the people on the right who are trying to justify this and see this as a win somehow. Where they're like, oh, they're just playing 3D chess. Like, first of all, no. Absolutely not. Trump is eating the pieces, and Elon is paying someone else to play chess and pretend it's him. What else say?
That's great.
Thank you. But look, if they were having like a minor disagreement, okay. But at what point in the 3D chess was Trump being like, and this is the point where you call me a pedophile?
Yeah.
Because we're winning. I don't know who broke up with who, but I think we win.
Well, it's like Alien versus Predator. No matter who wins, we lose.
No, it's literally an Alien versus Predator.
An illegal alien, yeah. Do you think he gets deported?
I think Elon gets deported and then buys Florida. He just buys all the property around Mar-a-Lago.
It does look like a ship maybe he can launch into space, hopefully.
Well, that state does look like a dick.
Yeah.
So he's just standing outside of Mar-a-Lago with a boombox playing In Your Eyes.
Can we do this for the rest of the show?
I should have done this instead of the show. I was reading through it, and for a moment I thought I had picked up one of my Webster fantasy novels. Because I was like, man, this will they, won't they is a lot. And, this whole enemies to lovers to enemies trope has been done.
I mean, they're arguing like bitchy old queens. And it is Pride Month. So, I don't know, I just didn't expect this kind of pride celebration from them.
All these idiots who are like, oh, June is going to be Veterans Month. Like, no, it's just two old divas screaming at each other.
How do you think Elon really got his black eye? Do you think like Trump hit him?
No, he fell into a door.
Did you all catch that? That black eye? I was laughing at that. Apparently it was his 5-year-old son that done it. I'm sceptical, but that's what he said. He said his son did him.
That's so fucking dark! He fell into a door, but it was a Cybertruck door, so it fell off.
The door was using autopilot and didn't stop in time.
It's not its fault.
It's not the door's fault. It hit him on the way out.
In 2018, the southern Caribbean island nation of Trinidad and Tobago stood at a historic crossroads. The country could continue down the path of oppression that it had been set on by Christian colonial powers centuries ago, or it could finally embrace a free and fair future for its people.
This is Queer Kingdom. Go and follow them. He is brilliant. It's all about LGBTQI+. In different countries and things like that. He really is good.
People. And on April 12, 2018, the country's High Court decided on the latter when it passed down a landmark ruling that found the barbaric colonial-era laws that criminalized homosexuality were unconstitutional. It was a clear affirmation that LGBTQ people are entitled to live without fear of state-sponsored violence and subjugation, and it seemed to foreshadow a growing tolerance of queer people in Trinidad and Tobago society. For a brief moment, the country was hailed as a beacon of progress in the Caribbean, and this gave hope that other countries in the region that still criminalized gay relationships, like Jamaica and Grenada, might eventually follow this example and begin the process of dismantling their own hateful and baseless laws. But tragically, this is not at all what has come to pass. In fact, quite the opposite. As on March 25th, 2025, the government of Trinidad and Tobago decided the country was done with human rights, and that it would instead begin sprinting backwards at full speed to create an even worse situation for its already most marginalized citizens by reinstating criminal penalties.
Okay, in 2025, the Trinidad and Tobago Court of Appeal reinstated the laws that criminalise homosexuality between men. The penalty is 5 years imprisonment, not 25 years it had been before the laws were struck down. Christ.
For those accused of being gay. This makes Trinidad and Tobago the only country in modern history to recriminalize homosexuality after it had been decriminalized. An unspeakably humiliating and shameful title that the island nation now holds. After 7 years of slow but steady healing, 7 years of tasting freedom, and 7 years of hopeful possibilities, the government has plunged the nation back into being a living nightmare and waking hell for its LGBTQ citizens, with this decision that is not only legally regressive, but morally indefensible. Like most terrible things, the root of this injustice can be found in history, and in particular with sections 13 and 16 of the Sexual Offences Act of 1861.
I'll just read this one out. In 1861, when we were still in charge, Britain's Offences Against the Person Act also applied to Trinidad and Tobago, which punished buggery, or sodomy's a little bit nicer than buggery, with up to life imprisonment. Delightful. This was maintained in Trinidad and Tobago upon independence until 1986. Christ's sake. Like I say, the British Empire fucking sucked.
Which has for nearly 2 centuries punished individuals in consensual same-sex relationships with 25 years in prison. These laws were vestiges of Christian colonial rule, as both Spain and Britain have each taken turns forcing their religious extremism on the island nation over the centuries. But instead of an independent Trinidad and Tobago opposing the laws that had been previously forced upon it by foreign radicals over 150 years ago, in 1986, the newly sovereign government doubled down on this primitive colonial-era bigotry by adopting its own new and even more comprehensively oppressive laws against LGBTQ people, making the situation even worse for our community than before. It seemed this dark chapter in the country's history had finally come to a close in 2018, when these very laws were successfully challenged by human rights advocate Jason Jones, who brought the case forward on the grounds that they violated the constitutional protections of privacy, liberty, and equality. But opposition to the ruling was immediate and intense, particularly from religious institutions and conservative political actors. And though the ruling remained in effect for 7 years, it was never fully accompanied with any true legislative reform. Then, in late March of this year, these 2 justices on an appeals court in Trinidad and Tobago caved to conservative and religious lobbyists by reinstating similar criminal penalties to what the High Court had previously struck down. So now, as we speak, anyone in a same-sex relationship who is found by authorities can be sentenced to 5 years in prison. I wonder if the churches in the country are finally happy now that random queer people are back to being locked up. Hint, no, they never will be, until the entire world is under strict biblical law, which, another hint, is nearly identical to Islamic Sharia law at its core. And let's be extremely clear, the consequences of this reversal of basic human rights are not theoretical or abstract. The consequences are real, immediate, and life-destroying to queer people in the country. Police harassment, arrest, and violence towards LGBTQ individuals are not only tolerated, but now encouraged by the law. Familial abuse is now, once again, emboldened by the law, and employers, landlords, and healthcare providers are not merely allowed to discriminate against us, but are legally obliged to. The fact the country has chosen of its own accord to run back to theocratic oppression is likely unthinkable even to the adults in our community of Trinidad and Tobago. But for the country's LGBTQ youth, who grew up believing their country was moving towards equality, there is a deep wound that words cannot easily describe. The government of Trinidad and Tobago has sent a clear message to its own people and to the world that the country not only places no value on LGBTQ people's lives, but that it views them as a threat in need of incarceration. Perhaps it is self-evident, but trans people also have no rights in the country, and changing one's legal gender is completely illegal in all circumstances. Furthermore, as one would also likely assume, no anti-discrimination laws exist in the country, and conversion therapy is still legal and practiced throughout Trinidad and Tobago. Across the board, the situation is beyond dire. Now, some watching may be asking themselves why. Why would a country's leaders and courts put so much effort into persecuting our people? Well, the answer is terribly simple. Weak, incompetent, and failed leadership use the most vulnerable members of their society as a scapegoat for their inaptitude. They play to their base of uneducated, angry, and religious followers who need an easy target to blame their unhappy and poor lives upon. See, the GDP per capita of Trinidad and Tobago is more than $1,000 lower now than even in 2008, meaning the country has stagnated for almost 2 decades and has squandered the many opportunities that vast oil wealth, tourism, and a young population had given it. As such, leadership turns to attacking queer people instead of owning up to their own failures. A story we see around the world, and a tale as old as time, covering up your incompetence by blaming those with the least power to make their voices heard. But what these leaders around the world fail to accept is that no society or country that aspires to prosperity or modernity can achieve such heights when stooping to such unfathomable lows. The betrayal of justice and liberty has never and will never lead to greatness. Unfortunately, there is no international force that will sweep in to defend us. We are, at this point in history, on our own. But that also does not mean we are entirely powerless to bringing about change and fighting with our time, our money, and our voices. The most potent form of resistance that many of us can do when a country violates basic human dignity is to make certain we are.
I'll read this out. Boycott travel to Trinidad and Tobago until LGBTQ+ rights are fully restored. Contact cruise lines and airlines that listed Trinidad and Tobago as a destination and demand policy reviews. Basically, stop going to them. Refuse to do business with companies complicit in funding persecution. So that'd be divestment. Urge your government to raise the issue in international forums. Support Caribbean LGBTQ+ organisations working on the ground legally, medically and emotionally.
Not enabling such abuses with our own resources. This can look like a suspension of travel and tourism to Trinidad and Tobago until the grotesque law criminalizing being gay is overturned. Divesting from any companies or portfolios that include the nation's primary exports of natural gas, ammonia, and iron ore. I am broke, and many of you watching are too, but for those who are invested in global markets, vote for a free world with where you put your money. And finally, do not be silent. Share the plight of LGBTQ people in Trinidad and Tobago with sympathetic leaders in your country, and discourage anyone you know who may be considering a trip to such anti-queer destinations. Spreading awareness and withholding the so-called pink dollar should never be underestimated, as doing so can have unforeseen and powerful impacts. Sadly, it will likely take a massive wake-up call for the government to change its course, especially considering the vast majority of those polled in the country oppose LGBTQ people's right to exist. But this does not mean that all hope is lost. Many brave activists in Trinidad and Tobago continue to fight for liberation, and our global community has so much power through how we spend our money, where we spend our time, and the way we use our voices. The fact we are having to cover this story in 2025 is not only intellectually absurd, it is truly deranged. To the judges who reintroduced this archaic and unforgivable law, and to the institutions that have supported it, history will not remember you kindly. And to those in Trinidad and Tobago who opposed this injustice, activists, attorneys, citizens, we see you, we stand with you, and we believe in your courage. You deserve a free and safe future. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. One day, this court and government will be gone, this law will be overturned, and things truly will get better. And now, for today's queer news story, we have an encouraging development out of Puerto Rico, where on June 2nd, 2025, its own Supreme Court ruled that non-binary people are now allowed to select X as a gender-neutral marker on official documentation, like birth certificates. This massive victory for LGBTQ rights means that if Puerto Rico were an independent country, it would now be tied with Germany and Chile as the 5th best in the world for queer rights overall, and would also be the 16th in the world to legally recognize non-binary people. Puerto Rico shows that even though much of the world is moving in the wrong direction, including most jurisdictions in the USA, some places are continuing to improve their laws and become ever more free and open to our people. So, well done to Puerto Rico. Hopefully the idiots in Washington...
Well done, Puerto Rico. Good for yous. Idiots in Washington, D.C.
will one day take some notes and learn what an actual love for liberty looks like in practice. Thank you, friends, for watching and spending time today with me as we seek to spread the word about important topics in the community. For those interested, you are more than welcome to stay around and join our increasingly powerful kingdom here on YouTube as we fight for our future. Until next time, QK out.
There is this pervasive idea that, well, we need to cut benefits to force people into work. What's interesting is in Denmark, they have a higher labour rate of participation. Yet Denmark had a
Okay. Helena. Curtis from Turn Left. He's on GB News, basically educating a Tory peer called Baroness Foster. The bit at the end is quite fun. Wait for it.
far higher welfare state. So there's actually no correlation between cutting benefits to get people into work. You need to look at the entire economy holistically.
Why not have better wages, better workers' rights, making it so that people who do get off of welfare into work aren't bottles in an Amazon delivery truck, whereas we've just been left with fulfillment centres and call centres and Uber Eats as the sole place where people can go to work if they don't have skills. You can literally be flipping burgers in Denmark, and we have such a good wages, you get paid more than a mechanic for Honda in an American factory. It's why people are not encouraged to get into work, because work doesn't pay well and the conditions suck. Once your benefits get cut for being workless, it just kneecaps the ability of people to be in the position to find work, to travel to interviews, to be able to get themselves educated, to be able to do this, right? It's such a backward system that's just always failed, as Curtis makes correctly with a comparison with Denmark.
To make a comparison with the Danish economy, I've travelled my entire life and lived in a number of countries, and I was also in the European Parliament for 15 years, so you can't make a comparison there just because
I mean, you can, and your rebuttal to this is, well, I was in the European Parliament, I've travelled to other countries. I'm like, that doesn't make you an expert on fiscal policy. It's essentially just, I'm older, therefore I know better. See, I told you she was a Karen.
You see something? You can, yeah. No, you can't,
Yes, you can.
because these systems are actually completely different. You will find in Denmark, people aren't basically loitering on the sofa year in and year out with actually getting a job.
Why is this the case? Her argument is, well,
I'm not loitering on a sofa. Shut up, Baroness Foster. You absolutely good. She's a Tory peer, by the way, so she's in the other place, the House of Lords. Which shouldn't exist. It's unelected. They get appointed by governments. They get appointed, they get put in the place by whatever government it is. So that's delightful. It's archaic and we need rid of it. It really is a fucking backward system we've got here in the UK. Fucking hate it.
Can't compare Denmark because they have lower worklessness, and I'm like, that's literally the point you made, is that they have lower worklessness even though their welfare state is more generous. Even with that welfare being generous, they're not incentivized to do so, which is your argument for cutting welfare. We've already broken that argument by looking at a population who've had access to a very generous welfare state, and it's not created a culture of worklessness.
There are far too many people who are on disability.
The benefits are higher in Denmark, so why is it...
It's irrelevant.
I don't understand the logic behind that. So why is Denmark...
Far too many people on disability benefits? Fuck you. Yeah. Bonk.
My logic is quite clear.
You've not quantified why you believe what you believe. We want you to make the argument as to why you think it is outside of the level of generosity of the welfare state.
Because you can't do like for like. What I'm saying is, we have a very generous benefit system.
We do not have a generous benefit system. We have one of the least generous benefit systems in Europe. Let me bring up the Financial Times. Britain's social safety net is one of the weakest in the rich world, and its poorest households are worse off than counterparts in Slovenia, according to an analysis that shows that jobless benefits have covered the cost of essentials in just 2 of the past 14 years. She lives in Fantasyland. She just says things that aren't true.
The benefit system is massively comprehensive, but the trouble is it's got out of control, and that's left a lot of people basically lounging on the sofa and thinking, well, my benefits are great, why should I get out of bed? And we've got to get rid of that mentality.
And again, she's saying that this is a mentality that's been created by the welfare state, when surely if that heuristic was correct, the more generous welfare states would see higher levels of worklessness, as there is a higher incentive to be at home not working. That is not true. That heuristic does not have any real-world application because of the example brought up by Curtis.
Well, it's been a very fascinating debate, but the reality is, maybe the difference is, I don't look at data all the time.
You said it, mate. You said it. You do not look at data. It's very, very true. You are fully feelings over facts pilled.
How come you guys are still liberals and not socialist, communist, or anarchist?
How come we're still liberals?
She doesn't look at data. What the fuck? She said that live on TV. Ah.
How come you guys are still liberals and not socialist, communist, or anarchists?
How come we're still liberals and we're not socialist, communist, or anarchists? Do you know what those liberal? I'm a progressive, which is different. You said socialist, communist, or anarchist? Those are the choices?
Yeah.
Why are those together? Since they're opposing philosophies. So from our sets, did any of us give off the vibe that we think the government should control the means of production?
I don't know. I heard a lot of Biden support.
You heard a lot of Biden support. Biden! You think Biden is a socialist, communist, or anarchist? You think the most...
Biden was a socialist, communist, anarchist. This idiot doesn't know what those three words mean. I am a Marxist, so communist. Kai over at Proudly Radical, he's an anarchist. The lovely story girl, my Australian comrade, she's an anarchist. Lexi back here in the UK, another streamer, anarchist. Marxist. So Steve Hofstetter here is a progressive, so sock them, kind of. There's many different flavours of us. There's ML, so that's Marxist-Leninists. That's my best friend who introduced me to Super Hubby. So he's an ML, he's a classic ML, essentially. I'm just a plain old vanilla Marxist, essentially, because Big Daddy Carl fucking rules. I do like some anarchist principles, though. Some of them look good, quite good.
Centrist Democratic president in history is a... But you're the one...
I think he's a fascist.
You think he's a fascist? I think...
Biden was centre right, so kind of like our Tories, really. Trump's a fascist. Elon's a fascist. Most of his fucking cabinet are fucking white supremacist fascist people. Fucking hell. This idiot is completely fucking clueless. Educate him, Steve.
I am going to have a fucking aneurysm, Steve. I understand. I like the idea that you think he's both a socialist and a fascist. And an anarchist. I think you just learned the suffix "ist" recently. And let me tell you this, that question was the dumbest. So... Okay.
Was this documentary by Matt and Trey? Was this?
My sister-in-law is a redhead, and so's my niece. She's a redhead as well. Trust me, they've got souls. They do have souls, trust me. Gingers are awesome. I love gingers. We only had one ginger in our school. There's more gingers here in Glasgow. Not many gingers in Perth, that's a bit odd. Stepdad, he was ginger. Was it his mum or his dad? I think his mum might have been a redhead as well. She's no longer with us. She passed a good few years ago now. So my stepdad, he's mostly grey now actually, because he's going to be 75 in December. So he's on a bit, so it's not gingerish anymore. Kind of grey.
South Park, do you find that a documentary? So your question is, do redheads have no soul? What? Oh, so I'm supposed to be careful because you live with a redhead? How about you be careful, motherfucker? How about that?
Very dangerous question if you live with a redhead. Don't ask that.
Yeah. That's mean to do.
Most of the redheads I have met have fiery tempers, and if you give them an excuse, they will unload. Dear God, these people are fucking idiots.
Should I diet like you do? Or are you just slowly being attacked from the side? It's just slowly creeping up. And that's why you lash out at others. But it's, yeah, just so gray up. Oh, that sucks. That means the pubic hair is gray already? That's a shame. Summer up here, winter down there. That's a shame. The man of many seasons.
So I applaud you. I applaud you, Ireland. With all the flags, with all the Kafias in the house tonight. And I don't know if this shit's gonna work, but I have a special message because right now on the front lines of delivering humanitarian aid into Gaza and breaking the Israel siege, we have a message from our folks on the Freedom Flotilla.
Gaza. I encourage all of you in the audience to take action to speak up against this genocide and against your complicit government and keep all eyes on deck. Free Palestine.
Let's go.
When Tom Segev, the prolific Israeli historian, was interviewed by Haaretz for his 80th birthday, the headline read, "Looking Back, Israel..."
This is GDF. He is awesome. Give him a follow over on YouTube. Okay, this one's a bit long, but it is quite good. It's nearly an hour. Oh, Christ's sake.
Israeli historian Tom Segev thinks Zionism was a mistake.
Ooh.
Segev authored, among other famous works, One Palestine Complete, Jews and Arabs Under the British Mandate, 1967, Israel, the War, and the Year That Transformed the Middle East, and The Seventh Million, the Israelis and the Holocaust. At the age of 80, I'm starting to think that maybe it wasn't right from the outset, the whole Zionist thing. Most Israelis are refugees or the offspring of refugees. Not Zionists, but refugees. So you'll say, well, that justifies Zionism because this was a land they were able to come to. But we need to remember that the majority of the Holocaust survivors did not come to live in Israel, and that the majority of Jews in the world are not coming to Israel. They can, but they don't want to live in this country. So Zionism is not such a great success story. It also doesn't provide security to Jews. It's safer for Jews to live outside Israel. I read an extraordinary book recently by Peter Beinart, a career columnist and editor who's written for many outlets, especially the New York Times, where he's a regular contributor. He's also professor of journalism at the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism at the City University of New York. His most recent book is Being Jewish After the Destruction of Gaza, A Reckoning. His personal experience is no less than remarkable, and his current politics extraordinary. Setting aside his life story, the book also contains a well-researched history of the conflict. His conclusion, as he's concluded in a previous article for The Times and an essay in Jewish Currents, is that a Jewish state doesn't have a right to exist, and shouldn't exist. One reason people confuse Israel as a state and Jewish supremacy as a political system is that Israel's name itself connotes Jewish supremacy. Israel isn't only the name of a country, it's also the name of the Jewish people, and thus suggests a political system built for Jews, not for everyone living in the land. On the existence of a Jewish state, again and again, we are ordered to accept a Jewish state's right to exist, but the language is perverse. In Jewish tradition, states have no inherent value. States are not created in the image of God, human beings are. States are mere instruments. They can protect human flourishing, or they can destroy it. If they do the latter, they should be reconstituted to make them more respectful of human life. The legitimacy of a Jewish state, like the holiness of the Jewish people, is conditional on how it behaves. On how Israel harms Jews around the world. To defend Israel, American Jews are harming our community and our country. More than half a century ago, the writer I.F. Stone noted that Israel is creating a kind of moral schizophrenia in world Jewry. Jews whose welfare in our own countries depends on the maintenance of a secular, non-racial, pluralistic societies were championing a Jewish state in which the ideal is racial and exclusionist. Beinart provides a brief yet illuminating history of Zionism as a settler colonial movement. Early Zionists lived in an age of colonization when indigeneity wasn't a trump card. If you wanted the land and believed you hailed from a more advanced civilization and could thus cultivate it better than the natives, that was justification enough. At the time of Theodor Herzl, the founding father of the modern Zionist movement, colonialism was obviously openly admired. In 1902, during the period of the scramble for Africa, Herzl drafted a letter to Cecil Rhodes, the British imperialist after whom Rhodesia was named. In his letter, Herzl asks Rhodes to support Zionism precisely.
Rhodesia is now called Zimbabwe. It got renamed by, I can see him. Shit, I've forgotten his name. 79, by the way, the year I was born.
Because it is something colonial. Beinart additionally quotes a historic essay by Ze'ev Jabotinsky, founder of the revisionist Zionist movement, from which the Irgun and Lehi paramilitaries emerged. In The Iron Wall, Jabotinsky called the Arabs of Mandatory Palestine natives, whom he compared to the Sioux Indians. He called his fellow Zionists colonists, who resembled the Pilgrim Fathers and Joshua ben Nun. Today, that discourse has fallen out of favor. So while some right-wing Zionists still celebrate the ancient Israelites' religiously ordained invasion, today's dominant Jewish story, the one told by mainstream American Jewish organizations and by the Israeli government, particularly when speaking in English, replaces virtuous colonization with virtuous victimhood. No longer are Zionists equivalent to the pilgrims who came ashore at Plymouth Rock. In a 2019 interview, the former Israeli ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren, compared Israeli Jews to the Sioux. The colonial nature of Zionism was explicitly stated by its founding father, and it was apparent even to Western observers that the purpose of Zionism was dispossession of the inhabitants from the entire land of British Mandatory Palestine. This was apparent from an American fact-finding mission acting at the request of U.S. President Woodrow Wilson called the King Crane Commission. The commissioners state in their 1919 report, which wasn't made public until December 1922, that they were biased in favor of Zionism, but became disillusioned after speaking with Zionist representatives. The commissioners examined the Balfour Declaration, when the British Foreign Secretary announced Britain's support for Zionism.
Boo! Boo Balfour! Boo your declaration! Screw you! Fuck off.
While it states that His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, it crucially is followed shortly after by, inter alia, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. As the King Crane Commissioners concluded, it can hardly be doubted that the extreme Zionist program must be greatly modified. For a national home for the Jewish people is not equivalent to making Palestine into a Jewish state. Nor can the erection of such a Jewish state be accomplished without the gravest trespass upon the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. The fact came out repeatedly in the Commission's conference with Jewish representatives that the Zionists look forward to a practically complete dispossession of the present non-Jewish inhabitants of Palestine by various forms of purchase. Indeed, as documented by Israeli historian Ilan Pappé, the Jewish National Fund, founded in 1901, was...
That is on my wish list. I will get around to buying it. Trust me, then I'll read it. Should I read it on stream? That might help people. Ilan Pappé is fucking awesome.
The principal Zionist tool for the colonization of Palestine. Most of the JNF's activities during the mandatory period and surrounding the Nakba were closely associated with the name of Yosef Weitz, the head of its settlement department. His main priority at the time was facilitating the eviction of Palestinian tenants from land bought from absentee landlords. However, the King Crane Commission ominously foresaw the natural outcome of this expropriation. No British officer consulted by the commissioners believed that the Zionist program could be carried out except by force of arms. Indeed, even as early as 1911, with Palestine still under Ottoman control, Said al-Husseini, who represented Jerusalem in the Ottoman parliament, warned of the expansionist ambitions of the Jewish settlers. The Jews intend to create a state in the area that will include Palestine, Syria, and Iraq, he said. In 1919, just 2 years after the Balfour Declaration, the World Zionist Organization submitted a map of their proposed Jewish state to the League of Nations. The border stretched far past the Litani River to the north into Lebanon, the Syrian Golan Heights, and well into Jordan to the east, up to Amman. In the 1930s, David Ben-Gurion repeatedly demanded the Arab leaders accept Jewish settlement of the surrounding Arab states. Writes Simha Flapan in Zionism and the Palestinians, Ben-Gurion's territorial aims were large. He never tired of reminding his Arab listeners of the historical boundaries of Eretz Israel. He had advocated these historic boundaries since 1918, quoting the Bible to prove that the Hebrews had settled on both sides of the Jordan. Talks with Arab leaders in 1934 to 1936 amazed, frightened, and angered the Arabs. Their suspicions that the moderate declarations of Zionist leaders were public relations were confirmed when Ben-Gurion demanded that they accept a Jewish state in all of Palestine, including Transjordan and Jewish settlement in Syria and Iraq. The striking contrast between Ben-Gurion's private pronouncement...
That's part of the Greater Israel push, let's put it that way. I might actually need to bring that up to show you after this video.
Announcements and public statements provoked angry reactions in all centers of Arab political activity and destroyed the last vestiges of trust in the sincerity of Zionist declarations. It should hardly be surprising that the Palestinians rejected partition, what they saw as a dubious land deal with an aggressive, expansionist settler state. The Zionist leaders, however, supported partition, though for a cynical reason. After the British Peel Commission had drafted a partition plan for a Jewish state on some 20% of Palestine, David Ben-Gurion wrote to his son Amos, "I am certain we will be able to settle in all the other parts of the country, whether through agreement and mutual understanding with our Arab neighbors, or in another way. Erect a Jewish state at once, even if it is not in the whole of the land. The rest will come in the course of time. It must come." The following year, in June 1938, Ben-Gurion declared to a meeting of the Central Zionist Agency, "I favor partition of the country because when we become a strong power after the establishment of the state, we will abolish partition and spread throughout all of Palestine." George Rendell, head of the Eastern Department of the British Foreign Office, wrote that October, "It has become clear that partition will not mean what we first imagined, i.e. a separation of the Jewish and Arab spheres, but will mean the creation of a new jumping-off place for the Jews from which they will inevitably spread their influence over a much larger area. The Jews make no secret of this, and it has become clear that it is the main objection of the Arabs to the partition proposals. Ben-Gurion made clear his lack of willingness to follow through with the 1947 partition plan per UN Resolution 141. There are 40% non-Jews in the areas allocated to the Jewish state. This composition is not a solid basis for a Jewish state, and we have to face this new reality with all its severity and distinctness. Such a demographic balance questions our ability to maintain Jewish sovereignty. Only a state with at least...
See, look, even before Israel was established, that's what they wanted to do. Fucking clear, isn't it? They've been saying this for over a century. Fuck. This is bloody horrifying, isn't it?
At least 80% Jews is a viable and stable state. The severity and distinctness would constitute a systematic plan of mass expulsion of the native population of Palestine. Through mortar fire, massacres, and psychological warfare operations, some 750,000 Palestinians fled in terror. The new state of Israel dynamited and otherwise destroyed 531 villages and imposed a shoot-to-kill order on anyone attempting to return, which amounted to thousands of people. The words they used to refer to these operations, letacher, tirur, lanekot, nikayon, all meant the same thing, cleansing. The expulsion of the Palestinians from the city of Haifa, for example, was called Bi'ur Chametz, or cleansing the leaven, the name for the ritual of cleaning all traces of flour or bread from one's home on the eve of Passover. In one of the largest single expulsions at the towns of Lydda and Ramlah, Palmach chief Yigal Alon asked Ben-Gurion, "What shall we do with the Arabs?" Ben-Gurion responded, "Expel them." Upon seeing so many Palestinians in the city of Nazareth, Ben-Gurion angrily asked Colonel Ben Dunkelman, "Why are there so many Arabs? Why didn't you expel them?" It should be no mystery or mark against the Palestinians that they wanted a return to their homeland after such an enormous and traumatizing injustice. In this way, the Palestinians are consistently held to a standard seldom applied to anyone else on Earth. Would the world accept Russia destroying the houses of Ukrainians and barring their entry back into their country, even shooting them by the thousands if they tried to cross the border? Would this be considered justified because Russia is more powerful and the Ukrainians left, so tough? That's what happens in war and Russia has the more powerful army? With regard to the Arab states declaring war on Israel following the latter's declaration of independence in May of 1948, Peter Beinart takes issues with the common chronologies. By the time the Arab armies attacked, Zionist forces had already largely depopulated Jaffa and Haifa, Palestine's two largest cities. The war's most notorious massacre of Palestinians, in which Zionist militias killed more than 100 men, women, and children in the village of Deir Yassin, occurred in April. When Jewish leaders claimed the Arab invasions drove Palestinians to leave, they've got the causality reversed. It was not the entry of Arab armies that caused the exodus, it was the exodus that caused the entry of the Arab armies, concluded the historian Walid Khalidi. As has been documented extensively before, the Zionist forces outmanned and outgunned all the Arab armies combined. Even the largest army, Jordan's Arab Legion, was not only held back by Britain from invading the territory allocated to the Jews by the partition plan, but they had even reached a defense pact in which Israel would cede the West Bank to Jordan in exchange for limiting their fighting theater to Jerusalem. The Arab states stood no chance, and their intervention on behalf of the Palestinian Arabs was in vain. The consequences would reverberate throughout the region to the present day. In 1994, Jerome Slater examined the significance of Israeli historical revisionism, included in critical essays on Israeli social issues and scholarship. The expulsion of the Arabs gave rise to the Palestinian guerrilla movement, dedicated to the defeat of the Jews and the return of the Palestinians to their homeland. Acknowledging no responsibility for the plight of the Palestinians, Israel met the guerrilla attacks with a policy of pure force. Moreover, the policy sometimes went beyond that of massive retaliation against the guerrillas themselves not merely an eye for an eye, but 10 eyes for one eye, to include deliberate attacks against civilians in neighboring countries, even non-Palestinian civilians, the clear purpose of which was to terrorize them into ending assistance to the guerrillas. These included the attack on Kibbia in 1953, one of the most notorious of the Israeli so-called reprisal operations. Some 69 Palestinians were killed. 3 years later, Israel would invade the Egyptian-controlled Gaza Strip and the Sinai Peninsula, with the assistance of France and Britain. They occupied the territory for several months before they were forced by the Eisenhower administration to withdraw. Their intention was to remain indefinitely. They'd get another opportunity under a more favorable president, Lyndon Johnson, who would reverse course and allow Israel to stay in the newly captured Gaza Strip, Sinai Peninsula, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. Israel had tripled in size and had stretched its borders far beyond the bounds of mandatory Palestine. The Israeli government had no intention of relinquishing any of this territory. 2 years later, U.S. President Richard Nixon bemoaned how Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir was opposed to surrendering even an inch of the occupied territory Israel had won in the 1967 war. So opposed were the Israelis to giving up territory that they risked war with the Arabs, and got it. As Abba Eban, foreign minister from 1966 to 1974, wrote in his memoirs, Israelis would not have been surprised on Yom Kippur 1973 if they had not deluded themselves with the belief that the 1967 map described a stable condition. Exchanging Sinai for peace would have prevented the Yom Kippur War. Though it's often pointed out that the war ultimately led to the Camp David Accords and Israel's withdrawal from the Sinai, this wouldn't take place until years afterward, frustrating not only Nixon but his successor, Gerald Ford. He bemoaned in his memoirs how negotiations between Israel and Egypt about the return of the Sinai had reached a dangerous stalemate. The Israelis kept stalling. Their tactics frustrated the Egyptians and made me mad as hell. While it's true that the Yom Kippur War broke the political deadlock and resulted in Egypt getting its territory back, it didn't come about easily, and the Israelis refused to relinquish it even when it was in their best interest to do so. Israel agonized over its withdrawal from the Sinai, which wouldn't be completed until...
Eye Patch Man is Moshe Dayan. Moshe Dayan? I'm not sure I've got his first name right, but it's Dayan. D-A-Y-A-N.
Ronald Reagan's presidency. Also under Reagan, Israel invaded Lebanon in order to destroy the PLO, which was gaining legitimacy, and even observer status at the United Nations. The destruction of Beirut, and even the Sabra and Shatila massacres were measures to completely destroy the Palestinian political and even civilian support base for the Palestinian liberation movement. Israel would occupy southern Lebanon and wouldn't leave until 2000. Later that decade, in 1987, an uprising begins against the Israeli military occupation in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, then in its 20th year. It was then Defense Minister Yitzhak Rabin who ordered the Israeli security forces to break the bones of Palestinian protesters. In a typical counterinsurgency strategy, the Israelis hastily constructed large prison camps which housed tens of thousands and tortured as many.
See, they've been at it for fucking over a century. And our governments give them legitimacy. This is horrifying. Bloody ghoulish.
As 30,000 people.
So I was reading the torture report that came out, and the torture report focuses approximately on 119 cases. In the case of the Israelis, these tortures, the same repertoire of tortures, Human Rights Watch estimated that between 1987 and 1993, during the period of the First Intifada, they estimate 20 to 30,000 Palestinian detainees had been tortured or ill-treated by the Israelis. So we're talking about a completely different level of magnitude.
When Defense Minister Rabin became Prime Minister, he figured a new approach was in order. Not to ensure a meaningful step toward easing the military occupation or granting sovereignty to the Palestinians, but to protect the Jewish majority in Israel and to further the stranglehold. Before the end of the month, in June 1967, the 13th government of Israel voted unanimously to keep the West Bank and Gaza off the table for future negotiations. In 1975, during Yitzhak Rabin's first term as prime minister, he made clear that he would not negotiate at all with Palestinians. Wrote Israeli political scientist Avner Yaniv in Dilemmas of Security, as Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, a typical pragmatist with a noted penchant for cool strategic analysis, pointed out in 1975, if Israel agreed to negotiate, quote, with any Palestinian element, it would provide a basis for the possibility of creating a third state between Israel and Jordan. But Israel, he emphasized, would never accept such a state. Quote, I repeat firmly, clearly, categorically, such a state will not be created. But during his second term, he had a change of heart. Why? He explained his thinking in 1995. We had to choose between the greater land of Israel, which means a binational state whose populations would comprise, as of today, 4.5 million Jews and more than 3 million Palestinians, and a state smaller in area, but which would be a Jewish state. We chose to be a Jewish state. Despite his assassination as a result of perceived capitulation to the PLO, Rabin's positions were hardly radical, and his offers of statehood to the Palestinians have been massively overstated. In 2014, Tablet magazine boldly claimed the paragon of peace held positions nearly identical to Netanyahu. The article's author, Yair Rosenberg, provides as evidence a speech from October 1995, just a month before he was killed. Alongside the State of Israel, in most of the land of the British Mandate, would be a Palestinian entity. We would like this to be an entity which is less than a state, and which will independently run the lives of the Palestinians under its authority. The borders of the State of Israel during the permanent solution will be beyond the lines which existed before the Six-Day War. We will not return to the June 4th, 1967 lines. Amjad Iraqi as well challenges the myth of Rabin the Peacemaker in an article for the Israeli-Palestinian Plus 972 magazine. The words Palestinian state do not appear in the accords he signed, a fact that he and other Israeli officials were careful to ensure. The objective of the Oslo process was never to grant true sovereignty to the Palestinians, not in any meaningful sense of the word, though often characterized as a sincere effort toward peace. The reality is that the Oslo process was a natural evolution of counterinsurgency strategy. By establishing a Palestinian government and security apparatus ultimately subordinated to the Israeli military occupation, Oslo marked the Palestinization of repression. Much like the Americans sought Vietnamization in Southeast Asia, or the Russians pursued Chechenization in the North Caucasus, the Israelis shifted the burden of suppressing Palestinian resistance onto a local proxy. This allowed Israel to entrench its occupation while delegating day-to-day enforcement to a contingent of native collaborators, chiefly the Palestinian Authority and its security forces. During the 1990s, when the Israelis were ostensibly meant to loosen their grip on the occupied Palestinian territories, settlements doubled, and the Jewish-only highways sliced through them to create dozens of islands separated from one another, creating an extraordinary apartheid grid system. On his way to the 2000 Camp David summit, Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak told the Israeli Yediot Aharonot, in order to assure his constituents in Israel, separation, we here and they there, no return to the 1967 borders, Jerusalem united under our sovereignty, no foreign army west of the River Jordan, most settlers under Israeli sovereignty in the final status arrangement, Israel will not recognize any moral or legal responsibility for the Palestinian refugee problem. The late Nasir Aruri, professor emeritus of political science at the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth, wrote a scathing critique of not only the Camp David summit, but the American media's framing of it. Barak's mythical, generous offer consisted of 4 enclaves bisected by illegally built colonial settlements and bypass roads for Jews only. which would have prevented the Palestinians from ever establishing a viable, independent, and contiguous state in any area between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea. Although the four enclaves may have been called a state, the requirements of a nation-state were sorely missing. It would have been a state without sovereignty, without geographic continuity, and without control over its borders, airspace, and economic and water resources. In fact, it would have consisted of 64 clusters or islands in the midst of Israel, a state existing within Israel, but not alongside Israel. Moreover, Arafat had, in effect, relinquished the right of the refugees to return. According to Elaine Gresh, Arafat had already made clear to Clinton at a meeting in Washington on June 15, 2000, that a balance had to be struck between Israel's demographic concerns and Palestinians' demands regarding the refugees. And thus we see why Yasser Arafat's legacy is complicated, far from the celebrated revolutionary figure he assumed in his heyday. Nowadays, he's more often brandished as a traitor, or perhaps more generously, a flawed character who operated from mistaken assumptions. Ghada Karmi, in One State, the Only Democratic Future for Palestine-Israel, helped me be a little more sensitive to Arafat. Hindsight is 2020. He truly believed in the foot-in-the-door approach. Arafat's basic premise was that the state of Israel was too powerful to be directly challenged. The only way to achieve Palestinian aims was to hoodwink it into entering a process which would ultimately end in a Palestinian state. Arafat believed that the U.S. held all the cards and sought its appeasement at almost any price. But, as always happened before, Israel was acutely aware of this position and took increasing advantage of Arafat's weakness and Palestinian vulnerability to push its demands further for more concessions. Consequently, and as the peace process ran into increasing delays and difficulties, a number of attempts were made to resuscitate it. None of these met with any success. Even before assuming office as Prime Minister, Ariel Sharon, then leader of the opposition, made a provocative visit to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, accompanied by some 1,000 riot police. This served as the catalyst for a new intifada, or uprising, against the Israeli occupation. The conditions were already ripe. Despite promising peace, the Oslo process had further entrenched military and settler infrastructure in the West Bank and Gaza. This ongoing militarization inflicted daily indignities and violence on the Palestinian population. Wrote Reuven Pedatzur for Haaretz in June 2004, the Palestinians did not expect such a harsh response by Israel. They hoped that the model of the 1996 Western Wall tunnel riots would repeat itself. In other words, a brief outbreak of violence followed by negotiations in which they would win another few concessions by Israel. Yet it seemed that the IDF actions thwarted the possibility of the violence ending quickly, since the events spun out of the Palestinian leadership's control. This was ensured by the fact that, during the first few days of the Al-Aqsa Intifada, soldiers in the territories fired 1,300,000 bullets. This astounding statistic embodies the entire story. Why was this initially peaceful protest met with such extreme violence? As described by Ilan Pappé in The Biggest Prison on Earth, the initial Palestinian anger was translated into non-violent protests that were crushed by brutal force by Israel. The callous repression of these demonstrations led to a more desperate response, the suicide bombs that appeared as the last resort in the face of the strongest military power in the region. He cites Israeli journalists Ofer Shelah and Raviv Drucker, who interviewed Ministry of Defense and Army personnel, including the Chief of Staff. Their conclusion was that in the summer of 2000, the IDF was a frustrated outfit following its humiliating defeat by Hezbollah in Lebanon, who had forced the army to withdraw totally from Lebanon. There was a fear that this retreat made the army look weak, and so a show of strength was much needed. When Israel retaliated against a terror attack on a hotel on the sea resort of Netanya in April 2002, where 30 people were killed, it was the first time the IDF used airplanes to bomb the dense Palestinian towns and refugee camps in the West Bank. Instead of hunting down the individuals who carried out these attacks, the most lethal and heavy weapons were brought to bear on innocent civilians. An aggressive Israeli strategy of massive disproportionality that spiraled from the so-called Dahiyya Doctrine, the multiple flattenings of Gaza, and the current Holocaust in the Strip. Hello everyone, GDF here. I want to briefly thank all of you for watching and humbly ask you to subscribe to my channel. That's the easiest way to support me. It doesn't cost you anything. You can also join my Patreon for access to exclusive content, early access to videos before they go up on YouTube, and access to the Discord server. Great community there. I want to also ask if you could donate. I rely on donations and patrons since I don't get sponsorships. I know, shocking, right? Anyways, thanks so much for watching. Love you all. Thank you. In October 2003, the late Tony Judt wrote an impassioned article for the New York Review. The distinguished historian and professor of European history at NYU signaled his frustration with refreshing frankness. The Middle East peace process is finished. It did not die, it was killed. Israel continues to mock its American patron, building illegal settlements in cynical disregard of the roadmap. The President of the United States of America has been reduced to a ventriloquist dummy, pitifully reciting the Israeli cabinet line, "It's all Arafat's fault." The problem with Israel, in short, is not, as is sometimes suggested, that it is a European enclave in the Arab world, but rather that it arrived too late. It has imported a characteristically late 19th century separatist project into a world that has moved on, a world of individual rights, open frontiers, and international law. The very idea of a Jewish state, a state in which Jews and Jewish religion have exclusive privileges from which non-Jewish citizens are forever excluded, is rooted in another time and place. Israel, in short, is an anachronism. Judt writes that, while the popular consensus among liberals was an Israeli withdrawal to the 1967 borders and a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza, I suspect that we are already too late for that. There are too many settlements, too many Jewish settlers, and too many Palestinians, and they all live together, albeit separated by barbed wire and pass laws. Whatever the roadmap says, the real map is the one on the ground, and that, as Israelis say, reflects facts. It may be that over 250,000 heavily armed and subsidized Jewish settlers would leave Arab Palestine voluntarily, but no one I know believes it will happen. Many of those settlers will die and kill rather than move. The time has come to think the unthinkable. The two-state solution, the core of the Oslo process and the present roadmap, is probably already doomed. With every passing year, we are postponing an inevitable, harder choice that only the far right and far left have so far acknowledged, each for its own reasons. The true alternative facing the Middle East in coming years will be an ethnically cleansed Greater Israel and a single, integrated, binational state of Jews and Arabs, Israelis and Palestinians. That this was early on in the discussion of a one-state solution is evident in his response to numerous criticisms leveled at him. Much of the American response verged on hysteria. Readers accused me of belonging to the Nazi left, of hating Jews, of denying Israel's right to exist.
Nazi left? No, thank you. Nazis are not left. Trust me on that. I'm here to educate people about fascists and what they've done or what they're doing. Thank you. Nazi left. Bloody ridiculous.
Distinguished professors at American universities canceled their subscriptions. Andrea Levine, executive director of the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting in America, accused me of pandering to genocide and being party to preparations for a final solution. Alan Dershowitz of Harvard made the analogy with Adolf Hitler's one-state solution for all of Europe. David Frum, former speechwriter for President Bush, charged me with advocating genocidal liberalism. Despite the PLO accepting a two-state solution based on Resolution 242, as early as 1988, the Israelis never seriously considered granting a sovereign state to the Palestinians. It's worth noting that, despite all of the positions attributed to Hamas and their lack of pragmatism and their fanaticism being taken for granted, in 2002, a Hamas spokesman told a San Francisco Chronicle reporter that they accepted a two-state solution based on the pre-1967 borders. This was after the Arab League had unanimously voted to normalize relations with Israel in exchange for a Palestinian state based on the pre-1967 borders. The spokesman, Ismail Abu Shanab, told his interviewer that
In a startling move, the militant Islamic movement Hamas has accepted the terms of the Saudi peace proposal and is willing to stop attacks on Israel if it returns to the pre-67 borders, a Hamas spokesman told the Chronicle.
Normalize relations with Israel in exchange for a Palestinian state based on the pre-1967 borders. The spokesman, Ismail Abu Shanab, told his interviewer that they must now be practical. There has been generation after generation of war. Now there is a generation who needs to live in peace and not worry about their safety. So it is a generation that wants to practice living in peace and postpone historical issues. We speak of historical Palestine and practical reality. If Israel returns to pre-1967 borders, we will stop the attacks and postpone the right of return until later. If we have goodwill, we can solve it, gradually, patiently, openly, and in devotion to good relations. In 2012, an Israeli ex-cabinet minister, Rabbi Michael Melchior, told the Times of Israel that I have met with a whole strata of the most radical. The more radical, the better from my point of view. I have yet to meet with somebody who is not willing to make peace. Speaking about Hamas, in my assessment, it is possible to make peace with Hamas. Hamas is a branch of the Islamic Brotherhood. How many years have we been saying that the Islamic Brotherhood will never accept a Jewish state, the state of Israel here? Those who have been following carefully what the Islamic Brotherhood have been saying and writing, which people don't do, even the Arabists never do it, well, they had been talking about the possibility of living within Israel here. But that, of course, has never been reported here, because it doesn't fit into our picture of Islam. Indeed, in a 2009 op-ed, Hussein Agha and Robert Malley examined Hamas's message that it would adhere to the internationally accepted wisdom, a Palestinian state within the borders of 1967. Hamas also coupled its concession with caveats aplenty, demanding full Israeli withdrawal, full Palestinian sovereignty, and respect for the refugees' rights. In this, there was little to distinguish its position from conventional Palestinian attitudes. However, despite their show of good faith to liberal public opinion, the reality was not conducive to a so-called two-state solution. Craig McIver, the former director of the New York office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, who resigned in protest at what he called textbook genocide in Gaza, gave sobering testimony as to the reality of the so-called two-state solution.
You say the mantra of a two-state solution has become, and I quote, an open joke in the corridors of the United Nations.
It is, and it has been for quite a long time. If you ask somebody in their official capacity about the two-state solution, they will repeat that phrase to you over and over again as the official position of the United Nations. Indeed, it is the official position of the United States. But nobody who follows these circumstances, either from the political side or from the human rights side, believe, one, that a two-state solution is possible anymore. There's nothing left for a Palestinian state that would be sustainable or just or possible in any respect, and everyone knows that. And so when people are not talking from official talking points, you hear increasingly about a one-state solution. And what that means is beginning to advocate for the principle of equality, of human rights, instead of these old political taglines. That would mean a state in which you have equal rights for Christians, Muslims, and Jews, based upon human rights and based upon the rule of law.
On a personal note, I've wasted lots of time agonizing over the dream of an Israeli withdrawal from the territories occupied since 1967. I mistakenly believed this could be a solution to the conflict, justified by the prevalence of support for it internationally. This includes the entire Arab League twice. With few practical options for a Palestinian state, the PLO and Hamas have endorsed the two-state solution, as we've seen. I've had to painstakingly unravel the assumptions and narratives surrounding the so-called peace process. My conclusion is that a two-state solution is not an ideal outcome that we should all be striving toward. The tirelessly repeated words, two-state solution, are so hollow as to be a cop-out answer, empty of any serious examination of the situation on the ground. That's why it's a favorite of Western diplomats. It effectively prolongs the status quo in the hope that it can be forgotten again, while Palestinians languish. Politicians and journalists parrot the phrase because it suits this status quo, whether they're willing participants or perhaps they're still under the spell of the two-state term that seems to be so self-evident given the two sides of the conflict. Ghada Karmi has perfectly described the hollow ring of the term two-state solution. Prolonged concentration on the two-state outcome as the only solution for the conflict had made it into a mantra that discouraged imaginative thinking. Virginia Tilley, professor of political science at Southern Illinois University Carbondale, has all but demolished the wishful thinking behind the two-state solution. By the end of the 1990s, she writes, the settlements were major urban complexes burrowed deep into Palestinian territory. Their major connecting highways had sliced the territory into chunks, and 230,000 settlers were embedded in the region with jobs, children, social networks, and full cultural lives. That number is now as many as 700,000 for context. Even if most settlers claimed they would leave in exchange for financial compensation, this massive grid's economic, political, and demographic weight rendered it a politically immovable object. Any visitor looking at these massive planned communities and their huge road network promptly loses any idea that the Israeli government has any intention of removing them. By comparison, at their height, the settlements in the Sinai Peninsula or Gaza never numbered more than 24 and contained far less than 10,000 people each. They were essentially scattered outposts. After electing Hamas to government in 2006, by plurality but still through democratic elections, Israel laid siege to the Strip. The swirling anger from the blockade and the numerous so-called wars, which saw little urban fighting and were essentially waves of massive punitive destruction, were a continuation of what Israeli journalist Amira Haas has described as the good old Israeli experiment called put them into a pressure cooker and see what happens.
Right.
For this besiegement, redeployment of forces to Gaza's periphery, and ability to deploy its military at will, the prevalent opinion was that Gaza remained under military occupation and has ever since. Though this so-called disengagement served not only to offload the impoverished and resentful Palestinian population, it also gained Ariel Sharon political momentum, especially with the United States, to continue the settlement of the West Bank. Dov Weissglass, a prominent advisor to Sharon, explained in a 2004 Haaretz interview that the disengagement plan strengthened their case that there was no negotiating partner, since they would pull out without coordinating or even consulting with the Palestinian Authority. It also froze the so-called peace process. In his words, the disengagement plan makes it possible for Israel to park conveniently in an interim situation that distances us as far as possible from political pressure. It legitimizes our contention that there is no negotiating with the Palestinians. You know, the term political process is a bundle of concepts and commitments. The political process is the establishment of a Palestinian state with all the security risks that entails. The political process is the evacuation of settlements. It's the return of refugees. It's the partition of Jerusalem. And all that has now been frozen. But the walling off of Gaza into its pressure cooker and the apartheid grid in the West Bank is not a long-term solution. As Tilley presciently observed, the Bantustan plan will consign Israel's Jewish population to a permanent state of threat. Withering in their walled enclave, the Palestinian people will continue to resist conditions of daily misery and political destruction. And as their population grows rapidly within its sealed territorial vessel, the demographic, economic, and political pressures will build to critical mass. Juxtaposed in the highlands, pressed together cheek by jowl in gerrymandered borders, Jewish and Palestinian sectors cannot endure such pressures indefinitely. The formula is explosive, promising increasingly desperate acts of violence and possibly even mass insurrection by the Palestinians. If such unrest triggers more intense Israeli repression or, in the worst case, even an attempt to expel the Palestinians en masse from the territory, an action advocated by extremists already gaining influence in the Israeli government, a specter of regional conflagration would face Israel and the international community as a whole. As Ghada Karmi, herself raised in exile after her family were expelled from Jerusalem in 1948, describes it, a one-state solution offers not just a framework for justice, but a foundation for genuine, lasting peace. According to the adherents of the one-state solution, in a single state, no Jewish settler would have to move and no Palestinian would be under occupation. The country's scarce resources could be shared without Israel stealing Palestinian land and water, or Palestinians left starving and thirsty. Jerusalem would be a city for both peoples, not the preserve of Israel to the anger of Arabs, Muslims, and Christians, and the detriment of international law. Palestinian refugees would be allowed to return to their original homeland, if not to their actual homes. Their long exile and blighted existence would end, and the states that had played host to them could be relieved at last of a burden they had carried for more than 70 years. The long-running sore of dispossession that had embittered generations of Palestinians and perpetuated their resistance could heal at last. With the outstanding issues thus resolved, no cause for conflict between the two sides would remain, and the Arab states could then accommodate the Israeli presence in their midst with genuine acceptance. Such an outcome would by extension also dampen down the rage against Israelis and Jews that had come to fuel violence and terrorism. Arab hostility, real or imagined, which Israelis constantly faced and which forced them to maintain their state by superior force of arms and U.S. patronage, would end. Israel, which had become the most unsafe place on earth for Jews, could, when transmuted into the new shared state, be a place of real refuge for them. A normal immigration policy, once the returning Palestinian refugees had been accommodated, would operate under which Jews and others who wanted to live in Palestine, Israel, could do so according to fair and agreed rules. Peter Beinart as well shows how a settlement to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict will reverberate across the region, using the example of South Africa. Political inclusion doesn't only foster peace within countries, it fosters peace between them. In the 1970s and 1980s, South Africa waged war against 5 neighboring states that supported the ANC's armed struggle. When that armed struggle ended, the regional wars did too. Ghada Karmi provides 2 main ways in which Palestine could be shared. The binational model in which the 2 groups could share the country but remain ethnically separate, and the secular democratic one-person, one-vote model, based on individual citizenship and equal rights irrespective of race, religion, or gender. The binational model preserved the structure of the 2 religious ethnic communities, while the secular democratic model emphasized the individual rather than the community in the style of Western liberal democracies. Thus, binationalism enabled Zionism to survive, albeit in a reduced form, while the secular democratic alternative did not. Peter Beinart himself observes the intractable nature of the conflict and gives promising solutions. Palestinians and Israeli Jews both want self-determination, yet they are almost certainly too intermingled to be divided by a hard border. There are proposals for a...
I'm getting a bit sleepy here. I'll need to finish up after this GDF video. Okay, comrades? Let's carry on and get through this one.
Addressing this challenge, confederation between a Palestinian and a Jewish state, federation within one binational state, a democratic system like the one in binational Belgium that guarantees both communities a voice in major decisions. The details matter, but they matter less than the underlying principles. Wherever they live together, Jews and Palestinians should live under the same law. As already described, Palestinians would have the right to move, perhaps out of the West Bank or Gaza and into the territory of the current state of Israel, maybe into the Israeli-built settlements. Would this end in a subaltern genocide of the Jewish population? Virginia Tilley believes that worse fears, for example, of mass expulsion of the Jewish population, are greatly overdrawn. Some do imagine that anti-Jewish hostility by a Palestinian Arab majority within a secular democratic state would take the form of outright military attack or mass traumatic expulsion of the Jewish population. Many constraints would impede such actions, however, not least the new state's dependency on international trade and the Palestinian population's own anxieties for the country's stability. But also, with Israeli occupation gone, the very motive for anti-Jewish violence, which Zionism has always recast as anti-Semitic in origin, would evaporate. Hence, a kind of racial terror of vengeful Arab native seeking Jewish extermination is more a classic settler colonial paranoia than the likely outcome of a democratized Palestinian state. Indeed, Jewish language about bloody Arab revenge echoes strongly of identical Afrikaner forebodings about ethnic cleansing and mass murder by blacks upon an end to apartheid. Jewish apprehension about these possibilities reflects partly simple racism, antipathy toward Arabs moving into the neighborhood, and partly fear that mass return will translate into expelling Jews from their, sometimes formerly Palestinian, homes. Some prior agreement must secure people's homes, a delicate subject for negotiation. But, as happened in South Africa, mass demographic flows would be moderated by many factors, including individual choices regarding ethnic quote-unquote comfort zones, availability of housing and jobs, kin ties to present-day Arab communities, and income levels. A greater Jewish fear is that a Palestinian majority would eventually use its electoral clout to dismantle constitutional protections. But that risk can be addressed by, say, making any constitutional change affecting minority rights contingent on approval by a majority of that minority. Peter Beinart as well says the colonial fears of Palestinian reprisals against Jews are overstated, and provides compelling evidence to support this. When Jews imagine a state that grants Palestinians equality between the river and the sea, many envisage the supposed barbarism and dysfunction of the Middle East descending upon pristine Tel Aviv. White South Africans, who took an equally dim view of their surrounding, nurtured similar fears. Why didn't the comrades of the ANC and PAC storm through neighborhoods like my grandmother's, chanting "One settler, one bullet," and massacring whites once apartheid fell? At its core, the answer is achingly simple. Because most people, black, white, Catholic, Muslim, Palestinian, whatever, don't take up arms lightly. They don't want to kill or be killed. They do it when they feel they have no other choice. When oppressed people gain a voice in government, they gain another way of speaking to those in power, one that doesn't risk their lives. That doesn't make political violence disappear, but it tends to decrease. Beinart looks to an overlooked population that shows peace between Palestinians and Israelis isn't all that far-fetched. Every day, Israeli Jews who are deathly afraid of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank place themselves in Palestinian hands when they're at their most vulnerable, on the operating table. Palestinian citizens, sometimes called Arab Israelis, constitute 25% of Israel's doctors, 30% of its nurses, and 60% of its pharmacists. Yet few Israeli Jews fear they'll be bludgeoned when they enter a hospital or poisoned when they enter a drugstore. Indeed, they don't generally fear violence from Palestinian citizens at all. They don't even fear violence from Palestinian citizens who are Islamic fundamentalists. In 2021, an Islamist party, the United Arab List, actually joined an Israeli coalition government. Why do Israeli Jews find Palestinian citizens so much less threatening? It's not because Palestinian citizens don't care about being Palestinian. It's not because they don't remember what Israel did to their families in 1948. It's not because they like Zionism. More than anything, it's because they have citizenship. They can vote. So, although they face severe discrimination, they at least have some peaceful and lawful methods for making their voices heard. Compare that with Palestinians in Gaza, who have no legal way to influence the state that bombs and imprisons them. In 2018, when they marched, largely peacefully, to the fence that encloses Gaza, they were simply shot. On the role of Israel as a sanctuary for Jews from anti-Semitic violence, Virginia Tilley admits, the argument is undeniably powerful, but Jews are today nowhere subjected to more danger than in Israel itself. And for some, Israel is even seen as vaguely corrosive to life within the Jewish diaspora, especially when its brutal occupation policies are deliberately identified by Zionists as reflecting the interests and will of Jews everywhere, tarring all with the same brush. In any case, the perceived unfeasibility of such a scenario is irrelevant. The one-state solution cannot be dismissed. However overwhelming these obstacles appear, for no other choice remains. A viable Palestinian state has become impossible. The land base is insufficient, the Jewish settlements and Palestinian villages are juxtaposed in an intimate patchwork, and the two economies are already fused into one, bound inextricably by trade, labor, and natural resources. some solid proposal may seem necessary to counter the first common objection to the one-state option, which is that it is unfeasible. Again, the one-state solution cannot be dismissed on grounds of its feasibility. Like a well gone dry, the two-state solution is already obsolete. Rejecting the remaining one-state reality as unfeasible is therefore pointless. So says Ghada Karmi, Israel will fiercely reject the shared state, but will be powerless to prevent it happening. However much the state of Israel may resist the idea of a single democratic state, Karmi writes, it may not be up to them. The fact that something is difficult to realize does not make it any less the right thing to do, nor does the attainment of the one democratic state hinge solely on the wishes of Israel and its supporters. Other factors, though now unforeseen or thought improbable, could intervene and alter the situation dramatically. For example, a change in U.S. foreign policy, or a renaissance of Arab power, or some other extraordinary circumstance. Any of these could make a radical difference to Palestinian fortunes, although none of them has yet happened and some might never do so. An alternative state, from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, writes Peter Beinart, might become Israel-Palestine or Palestine-Israel, or perhaps something else that does not connote group supremacy. Of course, there lacks a political will for a one-state solution, but there also lacks a will for a two-state solution. As it stands, however, a single state already exists between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. An apartheid regime under exclusive Israeli control. Israel now faces a stark choice. Formal annexation of the occupied territories with inevitable pressure to grant them democratic rights, or the mass expulsion of Palestinians from historic Palestine. An act that would constitute a political and moral disaster with far-reaching and potentially insurmountable consequences for Israel. And even if a two-state solution were feasible, would we want to perpetuate and further the aims of the State of Israel in any capacity? As Ghada Karmi describes Zionism, I find myself wondering if the world at large might benefit from finding an alternative. In the furtherance of what is perceived as a self-evidently moral project, measures normally deemed to be unacceptable become tolerable as a means to an end which no one could disagree with. It is this which makes Zionism such a dangerous ideology. Wariness of dividing...
Lots of people have been saying that for decades, that Zionism is dangerous and deeply, deeply messed up. Just look at it. The situation on the ground is fucking horrifying.
The land between the Palestinians, whose territorial ambitions were historically limited to their historic homeland, and a far more powerful and expansionist settler state, whose territorial ambitions have historically extended far beyond the map of mandatory Palestine, is not unreasonable, especially given the steady rise of the Messianic settler movement in Israel, with prominent settlers holding powerful positions in the current government. Would an increasingly fanatical and messianic Israeli military and government be willing to break peace agreements with its Arab neighbors in order to conquer more territory? The Arab states wouldn't have much power to stop them from doing so. Military action against Israel has long been out of the question. Israel has always been the strongest military power in the region, and its supremacy is now overwhelming. Its nuclear weaponry is its trump card. Certainly no Arab ground campaign against Israel could even begin to assemble without preemptive Israeli attack, even in the impossible conditions of U.S. evaporation. As we've already seen, Israel has dangerously sought territorial expansion and belligerency, even risking nuclear war to hold on to its conquered territories. Can the world afford to risk such a doomsday scenario, especially one with historical precedent? Israel has from the beginning been in a state of perpetual war. Far from being a victim, it is the principal aggressor in the region. A single state which absorbs a large Arab constituency may turn the temperature down on the myriad fronts with surrounding Arab countries. That is to say, in many ways more than one, a single state that grants equal democratic rights to all will not only make a safer Palestine, a safer Middle East, a safer Southwest Asia, but a safer world for all. Of that, I'm confident. Hey everyone, thanks again for watching, and if you want to see more videos like this one, you can subscribe, become a patron. That's a great way to support me. Another way to support me is by donating. Thank you all for your support.
Okay, comrades. This is a sleepy, mad Scottish woman. I need to get some rest in. So thank you all for joining me tonight. Sorry about all the horrifying and horrible stuff we had to get through tonight. It was good to see it though. Always good to get educated about this situation, obviously. And I liked that interview that Owen Jones done with James Elder. That was really enlightening. I hope he stays safe there. Okay. I'm not going to raid anyone. I think most people have been going for a good few hours now. And they're probably going to be finishing up soon. So, go where you wish. Use my bonk emote if they talk about any ghouls or any Egypts. Or bonk a troll if they invade whatever stream you go to. Thanks again. This has been brilliant. I will be back. Well, technically it's Thursday now. I will be back after Kevin and Helena have done question time. They usually start at 8 or 9. So I'll probably go live again at about either 11 PM or midnight. 24. In about 20 hours. Roughly, maybe 19. So I'll see you all then. Thank you again. Self-care is good. Stay hydrated. Free Palestine. Stay based.